to turn the program over to our greatly anticipated speaker tonight, James Van Lowe, who's a retired field biologist and a vegetation mapping specialist. The title of his talk is Local Spring and Summer Floristic Digital Images and Discussion, featuring flowering cacti, associated wildflowers, and selected pollinators. Prepare to be wowed. Thank you so much. Looking forward to it, Jim.
All right, I think I'm unmuted. Well, John asked me to bring forward some images of spring wildflowers, so I'm going to do that this evening, and hopefully there'll be images that will keep you interested. What I've done is divided spring into 4 sections, starting with February, ending in June, and along the way, there are various groups of plants that flower. I'm going to try to give you a good idea about what those are. But to start it off, we're going to talk just a hair about our little drought. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the habitats that we have here. So what I'm going to try to do now is get us on a shared screen and see if that all works out. Now, at this point, I hope you're all seeing a yearly rainfall summary image. Is that something you see full screen?
Yeah.
Looks good, yes.
Okay, great. It's been really strange. You know, we've had an average year of rain is about right here, like we had in 2017, right at about 10 inches, between 9 and 10 inches. And so for 2017, 2018, we had those amounts. But if you notice, typically the heavy rain season is the monsoon season of July, August, September. And you can see how even in 2018, those numbers started to skew a little bit. And it was October with a heavy rain. 2019, August did well, fairly well, but July and September skewed way down. October was way down. Then we had a November event that helped help the plants out and help push them along. But last year we had a good March. Outstanding March is many times higher than the normal precipitation for that time of year. Then we kind of flatlined until July, where we had an okay July, but it didn't even meet the average. The average is about 2 inches. Little over 2 inches, it's a little under 2 inches. But starting in August, just almost nothing. Normally we would have good rain in August, September, maybe a little better in October. And starting in January for this year, nothing, hardly anything. So we're definitely in a drought. It's definitely affecting plants, but there are plants that are flowering. For instance, our early bloomer cactus has already gone through its flowering phase and did really well this year. Let's see. Is there a way for me to remove the images on the right side of my screen, Tom?
If you, what images of
Well, I've got the images of participants over here on the right side of my screen, and I believe I need to have that removed so I can.
You can go up. Well, it doesn't show for us, but if you need it removed, you can go up to, there's kind of a black box for different kinds of.
Okay, there it is. Okay, we're done. Thanks. There's a double-sided arrow there, so I just pushed on it. So sometimes you get lucky. But give you an idea, remember that on that chart, we saw that big March push of moisture over 2 inches. And this is what a field of Mexican golden poppies look like along Baylor Pass Road, or Baylor Canyon Road. I always forget which one that is. And you can see the flowering event that followed that right at the end of March, first part of April. Now, I went out about a week ago and took an image of this same habitat. That's what it looks like now. So you see quite a bit of a difference. Maybe some of that is related to just the way the seeds would happen to sprout this year, but mostly I think it's related to drought. Now, This is an emotional support burden for you all tonight. It's going to report back to me regularly during my program to see how you're feeling and about the talk and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to try to use it to respond to you and beef it up if I have to, and slow it down if I have to. We're real fortunate in the Las Cruces area. I'm going to go through a few habitat shots. We can go from about 3,900 feet in the Rio Grande, but from there we can see about 8,800 feet to the top of the Organ Mountains. So we have all these habitats that are available to look at. A lot of people ignore the Rio Grande, and I don't know why. I've spent quite a bit of time down there on the Rio Grande Trail and Mesilla Valley Bosque State Park. And there's just a lot going on down there in these riparian habitats that are relatively slender, in this little upland patch that's on either side of it, and even some of the semi-aquatic plants that grow where it's wet enough. One of the really interesting habitats is this line of vegetation that grows right next to the river. That's mostly milkweeds, and milkweeds attract a huge number of insects, and it's just really interesting to see that. We have a good band of coyote willow along here, and also a few cottonwood trees. If anybody watched the presentation I gave in June, it mostly concerned the species using these milkweeds. And at that time, I told that the Rio Grande is not a naturally flowing river. It was canalized, is the word they used, in 1938 through 1944. And any water that runs down it has to pretty much come through Caballo Dam releases. And there are some wastewater ditches that run in if we have a big rain event, or if there's irrigation overflow and that comes in and joins the river here. Of course, this is Picacho Mountain. But even along these drains, there's habitat for some good opportunities to take plant images, or plant flower images, and insect images. But for these areas, there are a lot of weedy species, as you might assume, but then there's also a fair number of natives. Now, Picacho Mountain's interesting. Gordon showed me it last year a lot, and I learned a lot from him about it. But it's basically volcanic rocks that have uplifted. You can see the colors in here, but it's also got a veneer in some places of sedimentary rocks, similar to the rocks that are at Tortugas Mountain and also Bishop's Cap. As you come down off of this mountain, you have this kind of an alluvial, or this fan that forms right along the base of it. And it has some interesting changes. Some great cactus species grow on this really deep gravelly soil here. And then it has some broad washes. And as you get out behind this image, there are some really good sand dunes, small dunes, and sandy areas. Of course, everybody knows Tortugas. If you haven't put a foot on Tortugas, you're not from Las Cruces, is the way I look at this thing. But Las Cruces, even though it's really close to town, receives so much visitation, in my opinion, still has a lot to teach. And it's primarily sedimentary rocks, probably laid down when there was a marine system here, perhaps a small ocean or something of that nature. But because it is sedimentary rocks, that means that it supports a higher diversity of some plants, particularly cacti. And I always like to give Tortugas just a little bit of rest in the evening. And so this is my rest picture for Tortugas. The poor guy gets used so much. This is the west-facing slope. And from the bottom to the top, you can find different cacti species. Right now, the claret cup cacti are just reaching peak on Tortugas and any other place where that you know that they grow, like out at the nature park and other places. So those that were healthy enough to come through the winter fine are now producing flowers. So if you're interested in some nice bright red flowers, this is the time to go out and look for them. Just to the southwest of the peak, if you walk down slope long far enough, there's some really good small sand duny areas, and you can really find some different plants going on out here. You see a lot of the opuntias here, and of course our state plant or state flower. But it's always good to investigate the sand dunes. This is from Saturday, so it shows you how dry the sand dunes are right now in terms of our precipitation and habitat qualities. You're probably all familiar with Bishop's Cap if you're from around. This is the other sedimentary rock formation. Again, marine sediments that deposited here. Another great place for a real big diversity of cacti species. Then this valley fill that sits below, it's kind of gravelly, sometimes a little bit cobbly, also has a wonderful diversity of plants. And just in front of this image are also some broad arroyos. Right now in the arroyos, Apache plume and small leaf sumac are really flowering away. Just across the road from it is Peña Blanca. And this is part of the Oregon system. And these are layers of volcanic material that are uplifted, as are the Oregon Mountains volcanic material mostly. Now within the Oregon Mountains, every once in a while, you'll see a little bit of rock that looks pretty light. Now, it could be volcanic tuff, but every once in a while, it might be some sedimentary rock too. So they're a little more diverse than just volcanic. The Oregons, you know, they're just impressive, and they're very moody. They're always changing in their mood. This is that day that we had all the lenticular clouds a month or two ago. And it just, you know, I'm taking way too many photos of them all the time. And my friends are so sick of seeing photos of these mountains, but I'm not, so I'm okay. But this is the west facing slope, which is the dry slope of the Oregon Mountains. As a result, you don't see as many tree species on it. Where you do see collections of trees or places where it's a little bit more moist, or if you take La Cueva Trail around these rocks, you'll see some trees stacked up on the north facing slope of this rock, and that sort of thing. So you have to be a little more selective, but you do have quite a variety of desert shrubs, and you have all these small habitats that are available here. You have the tops of the ridges, which will give you one habitat. You have more kind of westerly facing slopes. You have some slopes that are kind of easterly facing, and all of those will probably give you a little bit different look at the vegetation. Then, of course, you have this big valley fill plain that goes all the way over to Las Cruces. Just to the south of the tallest part of the peaks, this is the area where you're going to find trails like Achenbach and Bar Canyon and Soledad Mountain or Soledad Canyon trails. Again, I really like those lenticular clouds, so happy to show those again. But these formations here, again, they're volcanic, but they're a lot smoother, and they tend to support a little bit different diversity of plants than do the really high spires. Go over San Agustin Pass and pop onto Aguirre Springs Road. This is the end of March last year in 2020. And you can see on this east-facing slope how you've already got a few more tree patches, a few more tall shrub patches. Where it's slightly north-facing, they get denser and maybe different species composition. These are Mexican golden poppies primarily, and they like deeper soil. They like it where it's a little sandier, a little gravelier, and not necessarily as rocky. So you can also see where those kinds of soils have deposited here. You can see in this little basin, perhaps wind has brought dust and sand over the mountains and deposited here and here. So you can tell a little bit about the makeup of the soils if you pay attention to where the plants are growing. Again, of course, the east-facing slope of the Oregons, much more vegetated, many more tall shrubs, and many more trees. You have the really kind of rugged areas, and you have these sort of colluvial slopes. And then you have this plain of bouldery cobble and gravels that each support their own own kind of plant community. And I was out there maybe the second week of March, and there was still snow on that east-facing slope. This is the area where Pine Tree Trail, if you haven't taken that trail, it's a really pretty one. I told Gordon the other day that if I were going to concentrate on a single trail this summer and the drought continues, it would be this one, simply because it's a little more north and east facing slope, and it's a little more mesic, and you're going to see a better diversity of flowering plants. When you get onto the Pine Tree Trail, you see elements of the Southern Rocky Mountain flora, ponderosa pine. You see mountain mahogany and probably some oaks making up tall shrub stands. And the Oregon Mountains are just pretty to look at any time of year. They'll do something that'll make you want to take a picture of them. Off the Pine Tree Trail, we look out in the Tularosa Basin, mostly managed by White Sands Missile Range. Again, you see the tall shrub communities that are there, probably mostly mountain mahogany in that area. Here we have, again, the Southern Rocky Mountain elements, ponderosa pine, Gamble oak, lots and lots of mountain mahogany. But here, as we look towards this area of Highway 70 and San Agustin Pass right back here, you see the northern end of the Oregon Mountains. This is where the volcanic rocks pretty much stop. And the mountains back here, the San Andres and other mountains, are primarily sedimentary. And so again, a big shift in vegetation that you'll see depending on if you can get into either one of them. Of course, you all know the iconic White Sands National Park now, I believe. It used to be the monument, bounded by sedimentary rocks and eroding gypsum sand, which is actively moving, aeolian deposits of gypsum sand actively moving with the wind. But anytime it rains, anytime there's a moisture event, the sand collects that moisture, percolates it down, releases it along the base, and in these flats in between, you have a nice habitat for plants. And along the leading edge of the dunes, you have good, pretty good establishment of shrubs and some herbaceous plants and that sort of thing to kind of keep that that dune edge from advancing much further. You also have a large plain that stretches out to the east and out to the south of the active dunes. And this is a very good habitat for many shrubs and herbaceous plant species. On the south-facing dunes, there are even patches of chokecherry, some cottonwood trees and that sort of thing that have become established on the edges of the dunes as well. Doñana Mountains, just to the north of us. Again, mostly volcanic, but they do have areas that are also sedimentary. This is the Doñanas from the river, from the Rio, an old farmstead. But again, you can see you have some fairly unvegetated cliffs, but a whole lot of plant habitat and pretty good access into those mountains to look around. This is the side from the nature park of the Doñana Mountains, and then the little observation hill area, which is, by the way, a really great place to find butterfly migrations. Then you get a photobombed every once in a while. There's nothing that has more fun than a Chihuahuan raven. If you ever want to have fun, just watch ravens. They're the comics of the desert. And if we look off to the east from the Doñana Mountains, we see the San Andres and the Jornada del Muerto, Journey of Death, just because of the lack of water. But this really broad valley fill plain here has some unique plant communities, as do the sedimentary rocks of the San Andres. And what I would say in the final thing, if you find yourself out on Jornada Road and you're kind of kicking up the dust and admiring the stand of pepper grass, mustard that's growing alongside of it, and you meet somebody who's as crusty as you, start talking to each other about the plants that you've seen in flower and the habitats that they occur in and how they might get to them. And you'll find, I think, you'll be a little bit inspired and to open your wings, to soar, to explore, and to carry on. Okay, the ESV says you're all ready to roll now. So let's look at some plant photos. The first plant that everybody looks forward to is the Chihuahuan pineapple cactus. A lot of people call it the early bloomer. I like the name pineapple cactus just because when you look at a large individual, the shape is perfect for a pineapple. What intrigues me a little bit is that the largest plants seem to have the smallest flowers. I've never quite figured that one out yet, but maybe I will someday. Now, I've seen these flower as early as mid-February. This year, the earliest I saw them was right around the end of February going into March. Typically, when it's a little colder, they tend to open up only 1 or 2 or 3 blossoms at a time and kind of time it until it gets warmer. Then when it gets really warm at the end of March, they just let them all go. One of the things that we've talked about amongst a few of us is the color of the stigma. Now, what we've seen is a range from pure white to a bright pink. And I think this is the only cactus species I've seen around here that has that kind of range of color in the stigma. A lot of the typical plants are pretty much round in shape and maybe the size of maybe a baseball or just slightly larger. Again, here's that stigma question we were talking about. These are all white, pure white. And this is a pretty classic plant right here that you'll see in the field. The habitat that they occur in is kind of a grassland, usually kind of a south and west facing slope. So if you're in a grassy area, even sparse grasses, and it doesn't matter if it's gravelly or cobbly, you may run into the Chihuahuan pineapple cactus on these mid-slope areas. And volcanic rock. I've not seen it on limestone or sedimentary rocks. Now, usually they are single stemmed, but every once in a while you'll see one like this. Here's one with multiple stems, 5 of them. And I don't know if that's because 5 separate seeds got started, or if for some reason a single plant was stepped on by a hoof or something like that, and then formed other cactus out to the side. But anyway, when you see them, they're pretty unique and they're a lot of fun to photograph. I like the tiny ones that are about the size of a golf ball, or maybe just slightly larger. They're perfectly round, practically, but they always have the biggest flower. And it's usually a single flower or at most a double. So a lot of the photos you'll see are of a golf ball sized cactus plant with just a single beautiful flower. And if you catch the light just right, you could really do well. See how we have a stigma color that's now kind of a mild pink. These are 2 emerging ones. As they emerge, the petals are usually just a slight bit darker than they'll be when they're fully emerged. Again, this nice full pink color, and you get a good sense of how the stamens lay out within the flower cup. One of the big questions that I asked myself when I first saw this cactus and flowering in February is, who are the flower visitors? You know, who gets up that early and gets out in the cold air that much? I mean, a lot of times it's freezing at night. And then if it gets up to 60 or 70 degrees the next day, then these guys will pop a flower out or 2. There's a nice bright pink stigma. Again, back to pure white. It's amazing how, depending on the light, how waxy these petals look as well. Sometimes they don't look waxy, other times they just shine. Typically, you won't see more than maybe 4 or 5 or 6 flowers at one time. But when it gets really warm at the end of March, right at the start of April, when they have their classic big bloom, all the flowers go ahead and open and wide open, and you might see as many as 9 or so flowers on a single cactus plant. And to answer that question of who gets up and out to see these guys and maybe to feed on them and possibly to cross-pollinate them, the biggest contributor I found is the honeybee. It's pretty amazing that, number one, they're up there in the mountainous areas, and number two, they can find these scattered flowers. And they love when the petals just start to open, they love to attack it, to be the first one into the grab up the pollen and the nectar and whatever other goodies they can find in there. And of course, there's almost always ants around as well. And even that early in February and that sort of thing. And if you're going to sit there and take a picture or maybe a series of photos of one cactus, chances are a honeybee is going to have you in its sights. And almost every flower photo you take will have a bee butt sticking up out of it. But that's okay, that's how things get done. Every once in a while, they might even come out and say, hey. Now, last year was special because all the insects were asked to socially distance. You can see they're keeping it 1 flower distance from each other. Of course, we have the honeybee, and then we have someone here that looks like a honeybee, and that's a drone fly. I think that it probably has this kind of coloration and this kind of shape and about the same size simply because it's mimicking a honeybee. Maybe it keeps a predator from not wanting to go ahead and take it on just because of that. Here's a nice 5-flowered cactus, moderate pink on the stigmas, and a very full honeybee. Another bee that will come out at this early time are one of the native black bees. I'm calling them digger bees because they live underground, but I'm not an entomologist, so I'll leave that to the specialists. But it's not uncommon to see them on the flowers. When I was up on the observation hill in Nature Park last year in March, these very tiny halictid bees or sweat bees were out in force, and they were feeding on the flowers. And even though you might have beetles and other bees occupying the flower, here comes another one. This one has a red abdomen, or almost an orangish red abdomen and black body. I have no clue what kind of bee it is, but it's ready to feed. Here we have a metallic green bee crawling out of that particular flower, and it's had its meal. Beetles can be common. I think they do more munching on the various plant parts than they do on the pollen, but I know that there's always ants. And I think ants just like to carry pollen away, so I doubt that they contribute much to pollination of cross-pollination of plants or flowers. Earlier this year, I was a little bit surprised. I was taking this picture and I didn't even see this guy when I was taking the picture. Here's the longhorn grasshopper that is foraging on these flowers, and he popped up when I cropped the photo up and got it enlarged. Be best. Down along the river at the same time, this is in February and early March, the coyote willow starts flowering. Nice catkins along the stems, and they provide just a little bit of color in the otherwise pretty bland scenery there. But even this early in the year, you already have an orb weaver spider. You got the web all set up, it's already caught its meal. Nice little fly there. And it's just fun to see the critters come out and get their start on what they want to do as well. Now, a little later, when the leaves come out on those coyote willow, this is the primary habitat, these tall shrubs, for the desert viceroy. So along about June, July, that time frame, all of these viceroys will stake out their territory, and you'll see them all along the river using the sandbar, or the coyote willow, excuse me. Here's one with a dorsal wing view of a desert viceroy hanging out on a coyote willow with its leaves out. And at the end of March on the 26th, I've seen the earliest monarch now that I've ever seen along the river migrating. And I'm told that they migrate early in the spring to the north, about as far as Las Cruces, and then they head east. And this particular one was actually foraging on the coyote willow flowers along with a friendly honeybee. There was one instance after the leaves had come out where aphids had chewed spots in the leaves and caused the leaves to bleed sap. And as a result, this butterfly called an Arizona sister, a very large butterfly, popped in to take advantage of that flowing sap, and it was feeding on the flowing sap from that aphid damage. Cottonwoods along the river have already flowered, and this was them right at the end of March getting going. They always look like caterpillars to me, so I kind of like photographing them. It's all wind-borne pollen, but it seems to be very, very effective. They put out a lot of pollen. These female flowers catch it. Makes a great photo against a blue sky. And about a month and a half later, or about a month later, you have the fruits that have formed, and already the seeds are emerging. And of course, you're probably all used to seeing cottonwood seeds fly around. Makes it kind of look like the fog in a little rainforest here. But these seeds need to land on a moist spot in order to form a root. And it must do that within about a 24-hour period. Otherwise, these seeds are inviable. Now, the cottonwoods there are almost all occupied by mistletoe. The mistletoe is the broadleaf form, and it actually forms fruits starting in about December. And these fruits are extremely sticky when they're broken open. There are two birds that really like to nest in the mistletoe. The northern mockingbird is one, and the one that absolutely nests in mistletoe is the phainopepla, a flycatcher that's about medium-sized. But one of the things they do when they build their nest and go in and out of the mistletoe is they collect materials like seeds. There's even one up here in its crown you can barely see. And then those seeds, when they fly over to a willow shrub or to a gooding willow, a small willow tree, are passed on. And so some of the willow shrubs and some of the gooding willow trees also have mistletoe now. Another plant that's currently growing along the river, they're not doing as well as this one from last year, is canigre or dock. And these have the large three-chambered seeds with the large bract on them. Right along the water's edge, you have curly dock. And one of the things that the curly dock does is it shoots its seed heads up after it flowers, and those dry out while the water's flowing, and they make great perches for blue dasher dragonflies and other dragonflies that like to feed on them. You can see these are old dock seeds, and these guys come in around July. And they also make a great place for a wolf spider to hide to catch one of those blue dashers. And again, you see the nice dock seed and then the bracts around it and that sort of thing. So now we're going to give you a quick transition. I like to call these kind of photos wallpaper. These are Mexican golden poppies from last year. And this image was taken actually over near Highway 70 on Baylor Canyon Road, where the soils are really sandy and they really were sucked in last year. This is kind of a typical flower that you'll see for the Mexican golden poppy, pretty much an orange base color. these are pretty much pure orange with just a little yellow tinge, but no basal color on the petals. If you go into Soledad Canyon about this time, end of March, first part of April, you'll see them scattered among the taller grasses. I think that's lemon love grass along with some soto, just before you enter into the canyon mouth. One of the things that I'm intrigued by is the difference in these basal colors. Here you have a bright yellow versus orange basal color. Here you have a more orange and an orange circular basal color, excuse me. And they're always beautiful no matter what color they are or what they look like. This one reminds me of the Zia sun symbol on the New Mexico flag with the pleats. I really like that one for that reason. And you can have that kind of corduroy look, or you can have this very smooth surface, which is pretty typical. But again, I do get intrigued by this coloration, so you'll probably see me take a few more pictures than I should have of the differences, and also the difference in color from an orange to a yellow, which intrigues me. These were actually taken on top of the little observation hill at the nature park, or the nature park, and they were growing right on top of that hill in the gravel, and very, very tiny basal coloration on them. Here's one growing with a desert dandelion. Now, you can see that there's been a lot of soil disturbance here, and the plants are growing down in the little area below that. So these actually serve, if it's raining, to drain water into where these plants are. But also, these were dug for a different reason, and that's so these little guys called pocket gophers could work their way under the plants and grab one by the roots and pull it down and eat it up and then move on to the next one. But in the process, they're kind of like prairie dogs in that they turn the soil and help make it a much healthier soil, oxygenated, and turn the layers of the soil over. Over on Aguirre Springs Road, the Mexican golden poppies ranged from color from yellow and also a white flowered form. In this case, both the white flowered form has kind of a yellowish orange basal patch, and these have the nice bright orange one. And similar configuration here. But then we go to a pure white petal on them, and I thought that was kind of interesting too, that there's so much color variation in this particular plant. This one growing alongside woolly plantain. So you see a couple of woolly plantain flowers. I always like it when in the background image I can come up with something else besides just a flower photo. We go from a fairly dark orange, pretty normal looking plant that you'll see in a lot of areas out there, to this very nice color form. Always try to bring in a fruit if you can. When there's so many of them, it's just really, really hard to wrap your head around it. But again, this is over by Highway 70 and Baylor Canyon Road. And you see just a few little white variants right there, but mostly they're the more bright yellow ones. Here again, you see the more bright yellow ones. It's more towards where the trail takes off up to the mountains off of Baylor Canyon Road. But you notice something right here. See this little line, and you see a kind of the rougher, taller, yellowy poppies. But then you see something out here that's a brighter lemon yellow that looks lower and looks smoother. So I took a little walk over there. Lo and behold, here's that line of demarcation we saw before, but I was on the other side of it. We have a whole field of bladderpod mustards. And they're probably Fendler's bladderpods. And I saw a similar happening in Arizona when I was traveling over to California last spring. And it's just, there has to be some difference in the soils here and the soils over where the poppies are. I think probably the soils here are a little more compact, maybe a little more silty or clayey. And then where the poppies are, they're probably a little more sandy and loamy, more loose. Bladderpods have these big round fruits. And this is what that same species looks like on Tortugas. I got this image just at the end of February. This is Fendler's bladderpod. It's always fun if you can get them intertwining, in this case with a soto, and bring them in close and see that, hey, here's a butterfly larvae feeding on a leaf. I really like the venation patterns, particularly when you can get an insect associated. Of course, the mustard's four-petaled and very typical of the plant family. This one, we have a visitor, a white butterfly. This is probably a checkered white. Again, I'm not an entomologist either, but I tried to play one on TV. So I'll throw out some names, and if somebody doesn't like them, I'm sure they'll get in touch. On this particular set of flowers, here we have a dainty sulfur finding nectar to get its life in gear. And these are last year's photos. Again, this was on Tortugas. Now, mixed in with the poppies, and also growing on their own in places like Soledad Canyon and down along the river, you'll find evening primrose. And for me, it's difficult to get good pictures of evening primrose because I usually go out when it's hot around 11 or so to look for cacti flowers. And these guys like to get out early in the morning and are all bright and bushy-tailed shortly after sunrise to maybe 9 o'clock in the morning before they start folding up. And here's some new flowers to be someday. And then typical, they do get beat up in the wind a little bit. So if you have some wind blowing, they're not going to be perfect colors. Also in Soledad Canyon, you'll find the yellow evening primrose, a species of yellow evening primrose. And one of the things I like to do when I get into something like this primrose is I'll extend it to other areas that may be outside the flowering period I'm looking at. So you have to, I'll try to tell you when I do that. These are evening primrose growing along the river. They were probably introduced down there, but they sure are doing well. I always like to try to mess around with backlighting, side lighting, different angles on the flower and that sort of thing to see what works out. And one of the things I would tell anybody who tries to be a flower photographer is take lots of images, take them from all angles, throw about 80% of them away, maybe more, and then keep that last 10%, and they might look pretty darn good if you get them properly focused. Some plants though are just tough to photograph, and I'm going to show you some of this. Here's one that's backlit. It gives a whole different feel for that particular flower. I go out and take full moon pictures. I was over at White Sands towards the end of summer, and this is the yellow flowered form of evening primrose, that one of the yellow flowered forms at White Sands. Probably species Levangelifolia, but we don't really want to get into taxonomy here. But they're very, very pretty against the sand, and late in the evening, just before dusk, it gives them a nice mellow color. Also, there's a white one that flowers at White Sands, and I took these at the same time as the yellow ones. Again, this sort of a corduroy look to the petals. Also associated with the poppies are verbena. And verbena is one of my favorites. I always look for it because it's got this nice bluish to really bright pink color. And I can't resist taking photos. I don't always take great photos of it because there's so much change in height and that sort of thing. These are over along Jornada Road in that real sandy soil. And it's just pretty flower makeup with the verbenas. And if you can get one in focus like this one, it really, really shows up. But the other 15 you took of it, just throw those images away. Here we're starting to trend into a little more pinkish color. in a little brighter pinkish color. And there we are. We've reached pink. And I just think it's really great when you can go through that whole continuum. And also, they're just really pretty. Desert dandelions, they just kind of hang out along with the poppies as well. And I don't think you can take a bad picture of these. For some reason, they always seem to photograph really, really well, no matter what the angle, no matter if you're looking down on them, if they're all lined up in a row, or if you get them off to one side with the Phacelia flowering over here, or a side angle. I always like to try to get some buds or some opening buds and that sort of thing if I can, just to give it more shape. Here we have a little beetle catching some lunch maybe. Here's a very large bee, and notice that this flower is just opening. These bees love to get on the flowers when they're just opening, and they're the first ones to get to the nectar or to the pollen, whatever it is they're after. And this is probably another digger bee. Here we have a variegated fritillary butterfly, a kind of a medium-sized butterfly, feeding on the desert dandelion. And remember, we talked about woolly plantain before just a little bit. Well, here's some with emerged flowers, and insects really, particularly butterflies, really love feeding on those as well. Dorsal view of the variegated fritillary. And when you start chasing a butterfly around, it knows it really fast, and it does everything it can to hide from you. So this one jumped under a shrub and got into the shade, just to try to keep that big old lens from following it around. And here we have a desert chicory. There are two species that look kind of alike superficially when you're in the field. Desert chicory, which has these really smooth, glabrous flower parts and stems, bicolored bracts. And then the other one is white tack stem. And when you're taking photos, I'm pretty sure most of these large ones are the desert chicory. Take very, very beautiful photos, and they're very attractive to butterflies. Butterflies love these flowers. A side angle view. This is a really great view of a bud, and you can see how smooth that bud is. There aren't any hairs with glands on them. And that'll make a big difference when you see a tack stem finally. But I just enjoy taking photos of these. Sometimes they kind of lean up against the cacti and get a little bit protected by them, like this prickly pear cactus pads on this one. And this one up against a barrel cactus. And they're even pretty when they have the seed heads out and formed out. They're the awns just shine in the sun, and just really nice to take photos of as well. And when you can crop them nice and close and enlarge them, have all these star patterns in the various awns that are coming off the seed. And again, it's always nice if you can get a bud, bud that's just starting to form the fruits and that sort of thing in the image with it. Here's a bee that's foraging on one of the flowers, going for the nectar probably. I don't think it's a honeybee, but bees everywhere, so you often see a lot of bees. Here's a bee with a fly kind of hanging out on the tip, both of them looking for some food on the chicory. This little butterfly is called a Pima desert orange tip. And this is the tack stem. You notice right here, you see some hairs with little glands on them. Here's a little closer shot, and you see how long these hairs are, and they have little glands on the end. So this is the tack stem versus the desert chicory that you saw before. And if you put your fingers on these, they're going to be quite sticky and feel tacky. Again, the Pima desert orange tip, getting a good nectar meal out of that tack stem. This is a small white butterfly. It's called a desert marble. And again, these flowers are extremely attractive to butterflies. Then we have the Blackfoot, I call it. It's got some other names, and whichever one you enjoy most, go ahead and use. But white flowers are very common early in the season, and I think that's because they're able to attract bees and butterflies in for pollination. These are out at the nature park. And I always try to get close-ups of an individual flower if I can, just to show more detail, because when you look at a whole sea of white flowers, they often don't make a whole lot of sense to you. So you can make a lot more sense out of a plant's flower if you can bring it in close and individualize. I was over at Bishop's Cap, and these, I think they're moths. They have kind of a proboscis that looks like a moth or butterfly type proboscis, and 6 of them feeding on one flower, and it's really, really interesting to see something I didn't really expect that. Moths usually feed at night. One of my favorite plants is this vernal flax, and you'll see it on sedimentary rocks. So these rocks that you're seeing, these particular photos on are at Tortugas. And I really get into taking photos of these. I always have so many when I'm done with a photo shoot that sometimes I don't know what to do with them all, but I try to find a few that I like. And what I really like is the color pattern. We start out kind of yellowy, we get a little orange band, white band, this maroon color, and then this really deep red. And then you put this bright yellow stamens in there, and the ovaries down here. And just a beautiful, beautiful plant. And so this is one of my top favorite flowers that grow in the Las Cruces area. And every time you go out to take photos of them, they're kind of really thin stemmed. So they blow in the wind and they blow back and forth. And you either have to catch a really still time or a really still day, or if you cheat like me, you'll get a camera that has a balanced lens and a electronically balanced body. So it'll slow it down for you and actually take a pretty good picture without you even being involved. You can tell which flowers I like best because you'll see more images of those. So I hope that that's okay with y'all. Always try to get buds if you can, or fruiting stems or whatever. Sometimes you get the sun just right, you get really nice kind of shine. Also, when you're kicking around in the stands, like last year I was kicking around, I always kind of look around and see if there's more to a stand. Sometimes you find color variants, and this is a color variant that I saw in Tortugas this last, maybe about April, first part of April. And going from a kind of a fleshy pale color to a pinky color. The maroon is really washed out, but the center dark area stays about as dark. So it's but it's interesting when you see differences like that. You kind of wonder, I wonder what causes that, and it's probably just a genetic thing. But still, you can look around, look for variation, and sometimes you'll find it. While I was in a stand of vernal flax taking photos, I took some photos of this plant because it was different. It almost appears to be perhaps a different species, because you don't have the banding and you have a nice bright yellow center. So if it weren't so darn dry this year, I'd be back out trying to find this one. I know exactly where I took these photos. And so you come up, again, I say Tortugas still has a lot of lessons to teach. And this is one of those lessons where you find something that just doesn't, fit the known species there. And that's the sort of thing that intrigues me. Indigo bush. Everybody smiles when they see an indigo bush, because how can you not? It's got perfect color combinations. They kind of look like, the flowers look a little bit like birds of paradise, or something, maybe a colorful hummingbird feeding. In this case, we had some red-headed beetles that, fire beetles that decided to mate in an indigo bush, and they're using it for a good purpose for them. course, our buddy, the honeybee, sees a flower open, it's there. Pictures of just the tails on the fruits and the awns coming off of them, or the hairs. And if you get the right kind of sun, are just as pretty as the flowers sometimes. Maybe not. There's a lyre leaf jewel weed. It's another mustard. I learned it as twist flower from the neck of the woods I'm from originally. But it's a very difficult plant to take a good photo of a number of flowers, because again, it's one of these really wandy flowers that blows in the wind. And then the flowers are arranged around the stem so that only about one or two are in focus at any one time. And so I tried, but this is about as good as I could do. We got, you get one in focus here. This one's pretty good, and this tip is pretty good, and gives you an idea about the organization of the plant. This one's not the greatest, but these up here are looking better, and you start to see fruit formation. And there's our buddy. Going to come in and get the nectar off of these mustards. With this particular one, after the valves fall off of the fruit, the replume that's in the middle that separates the seeds within the fruit actually makes almost as good a photo as anything else. You can see here here are the valves coming apart, and then this membrane is called the replume on the inside of the fruit. And if you get them just right, get them in the right light, you can make a really nice image out of just the old fruit parts. Desert onions. Can't resist taking photos of them, but it's another one of those plants that I can hardly ever get in true focus, because they're just too many flowers at too many elevations within the umbel of flowers. And usually I'm happy if I can get a couple that turn out really well and really sharp all the way down into the flower. But these are on the observation hill out at the nature park, but there's also quite a lot of them along Bar Trail or Bar Canyon Trail and Soledad Canyon Trail. And they should be flowering just any time now in the next week or two. This one has some nice pink colors in it. I like it when they have a little more color than just pure white. But once you start seeing one, you're going to see a whole bunch of them occur in patches. Now down along the river, and this was taken a couple of weeks ago, you have Phacelia that are getting started. And again, these may have been introduced as part of the work that was done in the river. These are really attractive for different species of bees in particular, and some butterflies. And what I do is I use the Rio Grande Trail and ride my bike along that trail to see about, on the order of about 5 miles to 6 miles of river at one ride. And then I stop along the way where I find things that are interesting to take images. So that's why I've stored up a lot of images along the river, because I like to ride bike a lot. Now this image and a couple of others, here we have our bee again. And this plant, see the nice crenate leaves. We're taken along the pine tree trail early last year, just before the closure. And Phacelias are pretty. They have these nice, what they call scorpioid cymes that bend backwards. But again, they're difficult to get a lot of flowers in focus, so you really have to work at that. Back to Tortugas and also out of Bishop's Cap, this particular cryptantha or cat's eye flowers early in the spring. And it's pretty attractive for some butterflies. You don't really see as many insects on these particular flowers, but they're interesting, and the plants themselves have a lot of hairs on them. So if you can get a good shot in the right kind of light, they can be a really, really pretty plant. They tend to like kind of rocky, gravelly areas. Now, right at the mouth of Soledad Canyon last year, these cryptantha were flowering just off the trail, and this great purple hair streak decided that it liked cryptantha nectar, and she may have been ready to lay eggs too. She looked pretty full. But anyway, she stopped here to nectar on these particular flowers, and they're such a gorgeous butterfly. If you can ever find one with its wing open, the wing is this blue color, the whole top wing, or dorsal view. But typically all you're ever going to see is this view of a great purple hair streak. Another one of the plants associated with cryptantha, this is maybe a lapula, I'm not really sure, but this is a lupin blue butterfly finding nectar in the little flower right at the top of that one. Again, Soledad Canyon. Along the river right now, the spectacle pod mustards are flowering really well. I suspect, again, it was probably introduced in that area at some time, but it's a good place to see some early flowering of some plants. Again, it's a mustard, so you see the 4 petals. And why do they call it a spectacle pod? Looks a little bit like old Peter Fonda, doesn't it? The Easy Rider. Got his aviator glasses out, stick them in that case right there. Here, one is being is a source of nectar for a common buckeye. Actually, a butterfly that's a little more common later in the season. Here's a pygmy blue butterfly foraging on the spectacle pod mustard. And this is a skipper. It's called a checkered skipper. And it's another small butterfly that is foraging, that likes foraging on white flowers and this particular mustard. This is a woolly star, I'm pretty sure. And it likes the gravelly soil that's out around Soledad Canyon and out on the Nature Park Hill. Very, very pretty little flowers. And they have the nice cobwebby hairs on them. So when you get them all together again in the right light, you can get a really nice photo from this particular plant. And foraging on it and other plants in the pink family and the Polemoniaceae are small white butterflies. Excuse me. Again, I think this is perhaps a checkered white, but not totally sure. This is the Pima Desert orange tip, finding some nectar in a pink flower. These guys were growing up on Pine Tree Trail. I haven't ID'd them yet, but they were quite pretty. I was thinking they might be in the Polemoniaceae or a family like that, but I'll have to get to those one of these days. But they also grow in Soledad Canyon, and again, another checkered butterfly nectaring on those particular flowers. And the butterfly, even though it's quite light, is heavy enough to really bend those stems over, so you know how the wind is going to bend them if you're trying to take photographs. Then the lyre-leafed bahia, the yellow-flowered composite, quite common, and it's already starting to flower now. I saw some on Saturday on Tortugas. These yellow flowers, you get kind of tired of looking at yellow flowers actually out in the desert. Sometimes I even use a little brightener on my image processor just to brighten them up a little bit so they're not so dull yellow looking. But they do attract a lot of butterflies. In this case, another white butterfly, possibly a checkered. And if you can get the right angle, the right light, a ventral view, you can see all of the veination in the wings and the little eye looking out at you, and the color of the eye around the part that actually sees. I feel like I'm a success with a butterfly when the antenna are in focus, the eye is in focus, and then you can see from top to bottom on the wing clearly. And great if the flower is in focus too, but that's the least of my worries if there's a butterfly. This is the painted lady. That's one that's very common. You see it around Las Cruces a lot, and a ventral view of the wings. But again, foraging on that lyre leaf bahia. Here's a lyre leaf without any flowers, but these two dainty sulfurs are actually mating and just using the leaves as a platform to mate and probably to lay eggs. So they're still making good use of the plant, even though it doesn't have any flowers. This is a endemic butterfly that occurs out in the, this is the east slope of Tortugas, but it also occurs as high up as those mid slopes. They go up around Soledad Canyon, places like that, probably in the Dripping Springs area too. This is Dury's metal mark butterfly. And if I can get a shadow to go along with the image, I really like to try to do that. I don't know why, I just like the look for some reason, but it's a very pretty metal mark, and it is an endemic, so it isn't distributed much further than the area right around that part of the mountains. More yellow flowers. Yellow composites are really strong around this neck of the woods, along with, well, as are white ones. And here's one that's got a moth foraging on it. Creosote bush are flowering right now, particularly the ones that are in the sandy areas or near a wash. So you might see a creosote bush in flower. Of course, they root really deeply, so they probably have access to water that is beyond rainwater. And this is out at the nature park. When the wind really starts blowing hard, these butterflies need a place to rest in the sun, outside, out of the wind, and they love laying against the creosote bush. So here you have the Pima Desert orange tip. This butterfly is called a pipevine swallowtail, and it was out patrolling its potential mating and habitat area for its needs. But the wind was blowing so hard that it just had to bail out and get behind the creosote bush. And so I was just in the right position to be able to get a well-lit image. And then if you turn that one over, this is what the underwing looks like for a pipevine swallowtail. Very, very attractive, and something you don't even expect when you see that, a lot of spots along the body. And it's not feeding, so its proboscis is all curled up. But I do like to try to take butterfly and insect pictures, and I think that makes your whole field experience a lot more interesting. Flowers are great, but it's always good too if you have a really colorful butterfly along with it. Now, in the last photo, you saw the ventral wing of a pipevine swallowtail. Now you see that same view of a black swallowtail. You can see how much more patterned it is, how much more colorful it is, but again, resting up against a creosote bush. On yellow flowers, often when you have direct sun, they're so bright, they don't turn out well. So sometimes I like to try to take these photos of yellow flowers at dusk or just before dusk and early in the morning, just after sunrise. And you get this kind of really mellow color. And of course, a little later on, you have these nice fuzzy fruits. And I always try to get at least one picture with nice fuzzy fruits in it because they're kind of cute. Okay, now we have the Spanish bayonet, and it's starting to flower, or starting to send up flowering spikes right now on Tortugas and other places where it grows. So if you're looking for a bigger target out in your as you're looking around the east side trail of Tortugas, there are quite a few of these Spanish bayonets. I think the bracts are almost as pretty as the flowers. There we go. This one was last year, and all of these photos were taken on the same day, and these individuals all were in different flowering stages. It's an individual flower, and some little guys in here, I'm not sure what they are, foraging around. They're really tiny. Now, if you're out amongst Spanish bayonets, you're going to hear a bird chattering at you probably. That's because these cactus wrens like to hang out on these tall clumps of the Spanish bayonet, and it's a great place for them to build their nest. And they keep an eye on you the whole time you're out there, and they chatter away, and sometimes they'll fly a little way away from the nest and make a lot of noise, so they'll divert your attention. But it's a lot of fun to see the other wildlife react to you when you're out there, and to what you're doing and how near you're getting to them. All right, now let's check and see how everybody's doing. Uh-oh, I'm getting a little bit of a stink eye off of my burden here, so I'm going to have to pick it up a little bit. Last year in April, I was really amazed to see this big swarm of honeybees along the river. I hadn't really seen a swarm that I could get this close to ever. And this whole thing, some of the bees would go out and fly to find nectar. Some of them would come back in and go to the inside. So this whole thing looked like a big giant heart, really slowly beating. It was actually in motion. It wasn't static like the photo shows. And so you think and say, okay, where did all those honeybees come from? And then, here's a whole bunch of them. So it's always fun to find something that you don't expect when you go out, and to be able to photograph it. Flocks are always gorgeous, and in that second part of the spring, which we are now in after passing the full moon, is are these pink flocks, and they almost always try to hide under a shrub, and really get in a way of good photography that way. But when you can get them in the open and get the right light on them so that they're not shining too brightly at you, they make a really excellent photo. And it's just different from any other flower you're going to see, with that real rigid form to where the petals diverge from the top of the flower. These you'll be able to see probably in the next 10 days, 2 weeks, something on that order. Good places, Bar Canyon Trail, Achenbach Canyon Trail, places like that. Really good places to find the flocks. Penstemon. There's a nice blue penstemon that's along Bar Canyon Trail. Another one of those wandy plants. So if there's a breeze or if there's a wind, they're going to move around on you. And when you get a bud, it almost looks like a boxer's mitt that's all closed up with the thumb out. These are called bilaterally symmetrical flowers because you can draw a line, you can get a picture, a mirror image of that particular flower. This bluish colored one is really pretty. And if you wonder why they call them beard tongues as another common name, you can see the hairs on this stamen or peristamens that are sterile. But if you can get one isolated and you get it in good light, you can take a halfway decent photo. And so it's one of those plants that I'm still working on, trying to figure it out. While I was driving on Soledad Road last Saturday, I noticed in the area that was adjacent to the construction they've had out there for the last couple of years, that this pink penstemon was flowering pretty profusely. And it may have been, it was probably an introduced one as part of the seed mix, but it's still pretty. And I don't mind taking photos of flowers that are out. But if you do drive Soledad Canyon Road over towards the trailhead, you might see some pink penstemon that are out as well. This was last Saturday, so it might still be in flower, or others might be flowering by now. A real common mustard you see in all of the rocky areas, whether it's volcanic rock or sedimentary rocks, are this bicolored mustard. And I was taking photos of it last Saturday, so it's already in flower, and around the rocks, they tend to have more moisture available to them because the rocks will shed any moisture that falls and then act as a mulch to keep the soil under them wet. So a lot of the plants that are in the rocks tend to do a lot better in these droughty times. But again, it's one of those flowers that's really tough to get a lot of them in focus. But if you can get a couple of them in focus really well, maybe with a little shadowing, the background looks really nice with some flowers that are out of focus associated with it. I always try to get a photo, if I can, that shows the shape of the leaf as well to go along with the flowers. Makes identification a whole lot easier. You can see how as the flower ages, it turns this more lavender color. And this was from Saturday, and these guys looking happy to be alive and waiting for an insect to come in and feed so they can be pollinated. Here we see fruit formation. And sometimes they grow up amongst the cacti too, and that's always a fun photo when you can pull the two together. Gives a nice texture and color combination. There are some nondescript mustards out there too, these lepidiums or peppergrass. They're easy to miss, they're easy to overlook, unless you got a nice big metal mark feeding on them and taking some nectar from those flowers, those teeny tiny flowers at the very top. Now, I've been told that this metal mark is not the endemic one that we saw earlier, even though it has a similar color pattern, and that this may be some kind of hybrid with something else. So it'd be interesting to see how that pans out from the butterfly people. I just like taking pictures of butterflies, so it doesn't matter to me so much. This is another bladder pod, the white bladder pod. Earlier we saw the fendlers, the yellow one with everything going on, but this one grows a little later in the season. This particular one is Bar Canyon Trail. It's always nice when you get some flowers peeking out from under a rock. It's some nice, really nice texture and color associated with them. Bladder pods, so you have these nice round fruits. And this mustard, I've been wondering what it is. I haven't keyed it out yet or tried to figure it out. Too much evidence. A really tall wandy one that grows out Soledad Canyon area, where I've seen it mostly. But these things move around in the wind so much to even get one photo that is in focus is an achievement. So here I've gotten two, so I'm really happy camper on this one. But now I just need to figure out who it is. Right now, the nylon hedgehog cactus are just starting to flower. They were in heavy bud about a week ago, and I've been told that some of the flowers are now starting to open. And this is kind of a typical look you see for this particular cactus, with a lot of buds that aren't open, with a few that are open, and usually only open to this kind of a cup-like stage. These are generalist cacti, so you see them anywhere. Sedimentary rocks, igneous or volcanic rocks. They seem to handle most anything pretty darn well. And they're very attractive cactus. You get them in the right sun, even just the needles look like they could make a rainbow on some of the darker colored ones. But the flower is really distinct. It's got this sort of brownish cast to it, or I guess you could call it prune colored, and then a medium green stigma formed with it. Now, these are of limited distribution. We've got them in this part of New Mexico and then adjacent Texas. And that's about the only part of the range of this particular subspecies of nylon hedgehog cactus. Further east, these petals would be very yellowy green or dark green versus this sort of a prune colored. I like to try to get close-ups that show the depth. They're tough to do, but if you can get one, just look at all the pollen grains, the nature of the stigma and how all of the anthers are wrapped around it. One of the things about this flower that has bugged me is that I've never actually seen bugs using it. And so I don't have any bug pictures associated with this particular cactus. And that does bug me. So I'm going to have to keep working on that maybe this year. Every once in a while, it's really rare you'll see a flower that is opened up completely. And so I've only got in my my folders of photos, maybe 2 or 3, all the flowers that have all the way opened on this nylon hedgehog cactus. Now, this particular bug is pretty smart. It thinks that other bugs are going to come and feed here. This is an assassin bug, so it's ready to capture whoever comes in and make a meal out of it. So it's all ready to go, but if it experiences the same thing I do, it's going to get skinny fast. Another one of my all-time favorites to photograph are daisy fleabane or ridgeron, whatever you want to call this particular plant in the common name lexicon. But I've got photos from Pine Tree Trail and then from Bar Canyon Trail that are mixed together here. And they're probably different species, but we're not really dealing with taxonomy, so that's okay. This is more about going out and just seeing some really nice plants to take photos of. And it's hard to take a bad photo of an erigeron, even if it's just the flowering bud getting ready to open with all the hairs on the stems, the colors of the petals. It still makes a really, really nice image to look at. I always, if possible, try to get a bud that's opening along with a fully opened one, or a sequence even further than that if I can with a fruit as well, just because I think it tells a bigger story. It makes it more interesting. And it's always fun when you get a side view. This is hard to do, you get 2 side views and then a down view or down the pipe kind of view. But it makes for a more interesting photo when you can do things like that. So it pays to move around the plants if you can, and try not to step on other stuff while you're doing it. And just get a variety of photos, a variety of lighting, and sometimes try a little backlighting, a little front lighting. It's always nice if something else intervenes, kind of makes the photo a little more interesting. And it's just the perfect circle. You can't, well, if you like yellow, then the analogous one to this would be the desert marigold, and you're going to see some of them a little later. This one is kind of fun because it had a flower below, a flower above, and it makes just a little bit more interesting photo when you get an image like that. I like these sorts of photos where you have one completely open, one in the half flowering stage, and then one in the bud stage that's just ready to open. And it's always nice if you can, even to have them in the background kind of blurred. And they're not noisy back there. They actually add to the attractiveness of an image. Here's a fly that's deciding whether it wants to go in and eat. Probably after I left, it went down to get a little nectar, some pollen. Paintbrushes. Gordon says that he's seen a few paintbrushes in flower. He showed me a picture the other day, maybe last night actually. So the paintbrush is an extremely attractive plant. A lot of times it will grow under other shrubs. Part of the reason is because it's somewhat of a root parasite to shrubs. So it'll send an extension down that taps into the root for nutrients and moisture. But it also has the ability to produce, it has chlorophyll and can produce through photosynthesis as well, energy. Now, the ones that I typically see range from this sort of orangey, maybe even a light pinkish color, to fairly dark red. These are bracts, they're not petals. These are all leaves that have that are altered to bring color, and that should attract feeders, foragers, pollinators. The actual flower is here, this green. But here you see the green blades, which have the photosynthetic capability. Here you see the highly colored bracts that are supporting the flower, actually here and here. And the actual petals, I believe, are these guys right here. They're kind of three cleft. They can be really, really difficult to photograph well. This is a top-down shot, and there's just way too much volume to get a really good photograph, but you have to kind of take what you get with these. Little mustard hanging out back here. You can see the club-shaped fruits. But you do your best, and like I say, throw about 90% of your photos away, but keep on clicking, and you will get some that are acceptable to work with. And these typically are in areas with shrubs. So you'll see them just above the drainages or right along the sides of drainages. In this case, I was on Aikenblock Trail, and there's an Apache plume that had already formed fruit tails. And this stand of or patch of paintbrush was probably 5 or 10 feet behind it, but I was able to bring them both in. I guess the camera thought that it might get a little better focus on them. And it made for an interesting picture to shoot through a shrub with flowering fruits, or with fruits, excuse me, and then have the paintbrush show up as too. So sometimes you surprise yourself with what those cameras can do. Okay, banana yuccas. Here we're out looking at the Doñana Mountains along Jornada Road and out in the Jornada de Muerto. And these are relatively low growing yuccas with very, very long flowers. And it's relatively common out at the nature park. So if you go out there, it's probably going to be another 3 weeks, maybe a month before these guys start flowering. And I suspect they have enough stored moisture to flower. And this one, I believe, is a banana yucca. It was up on the La Cueva Trail, looking down towards Las Cruces. And the thing about this one is it flowered really late, like in October one year. So I took some pictures of it, and I thought I would toss them in just for the heck of it. But I thought that the flowers were long enough. It was probably more like a banana yucca than the other taller yuccas. The flowers are quite pretty if you can get underneath them, underneath that big raceme of flowers. And if they are open, you might be able to focus in and get a nice flower image. I probably get one nice flower image out of every 20 or 25 shots. So don't be discouraged. Okay, here's who's in full flower right now. If you go out, the healthy plants, the ones that are in the best position to gain moisture and in good condition are flowering. This is the claret cup hedgehog cactus. This particular one is growing underneath a sotol or next to a sotol. Flower colors are really great on these because they'll go all the way from pink and really, really light orange to a deep burgundy color. Some of the plants are quite tall. The flowers are all at the top. Others are very low growing and spread out in and amongst, in this case, creosote bush. When I do take photos of these, this one is a little more orangey color. We have really direct sun with a lot of reflection and then a little bit of deep shadowing. And it's fun to mess around and just kind of walk around the clump and see what the images will look like from different angles that way. This is as nice. This is probably as normal color as you're going to see, kind of an orangish red. And this particular one had good sun angle. So that's the kind of photo I really, really like to see for the claret cup. And these are generalist cacti as well. So you'll see them on sedimentary rocks, on volcanic rocks, mostly in the middle elevations. Although sometimes you'll see them sneak down on the valley fill material. Sometimes you'll see them sneak up a little higher on the slope where it's warmer. say a south-facing slope. But you almost always have a smile on your face when you're photographing these, because like so many of the cactus, every next cactus is prettier than the last. And so you end up with literally hundreds of photos if you go out for a full day shoot. Now, when I go out to photograph cacti, I don't really go out until about 11 o'clock in the morning. And that's typically when the temperature gets up around, maybe anywhere from 85 to 90 degrees. And then I stay out till about 2 when temperatures in the warmer part of the year top 100. And that's when these cactus flowers typically are at full bloom and just gorgeous. And then you have to play though with the sun being kind of over your head. It's always good to get a bud in with the flower. Again, I just think it makes it look so much more interesting. The stigma is this nice mellow green color in a fairly orange flower here. I like to get buds that are just starting to open. This one has a little bit here. The stigma is peeking out just a little bit. I like photos like that. And here we have a whole group of native black bees. I think these are probably digger bees having a go at the nectar and pollen. This one has claimed the stigma, said, kind of like king on the mountain or queen on the mountain. There in this beautiful orangish red, dark colored, but then this one is just opening. And like all bees, they love to go to the flowers that are just opening because likely they'll be the first one in there to feed or among the first ones to feed. Get a nice cluster where you have full sun and a lot of reflection, no sun, and a mellowing out of the colors. I always like to try to do stuff like that if I can. Sometimes it's mostly by mistake, but I'll take the mistake. This one has an ant down in there messing around looking for pollen grains probably, but just a beautiful color of the stigma amongst the stamens that clasp really close around it. This is the light orange color I was telling you about, and this one's in a shade, so again, that color is muted. It's a little bit lighter, and so it makes the stigma look kind of a lime green color, and then just really bright white around the anthers. I would say, for the most part, it's hard to take a really bad picture of a claret cup, and one of my favorite things to do is these ones that are maybe a third open or a quarter open, along with some buds. I really like that combination for some reason. Here we have a dogweed coming in on the side, and then you have the nice, clean looking flower alongside the stem. Again, if you get some shade on it, bright sun on the outside, you get some reflection, you have mellowness. You can really, really go, it gives it a different kind of texture as well as color look. This one is in bright sunshine, but just enough to offset all of the shine coming back at you. And again, really, really bright, catches the orange colors. Then look how much deeper the orange is on this flower with some shadow. And there's their bud. For some reason, I'm attracted to this really kind of a bright orange color as much as I am the deep burgundy. Don't know why. I think it's maybe because they typically have this really bright white contrast as well on a newly opening flower. But that combination with a side view of a deeper bud really, really looks good to me. Really, really pleasing and really pleasing. And here's that phase that kind of goes almost pink, kind of a pinkish orange, and then just this really bright white lower part of the petal and the stamens. This is possibly one of my favorite single open flower shots. in the shade, mellow colors, and it just looks nice. And like I say, every cactus you go to is prettier than the last one you left, and you end up with hundreds of photos if you really go for it. Here we have a really nice sun on it, but the angle is so deep that you get a lot of shadow too, and that makes a nice, pleasant look as well. And every once in a while, you get a real surprise. I'm out here taking a photo, and this is truly a photo bomb. I snapped the image, and when I processed it, this little guy ended up in the image, this nice little hummingbird that was out feeding on these claret cups. And I couldn't have staged it any better. And it's a pure photo bomb. So sometimes you get lucky, and that's okay too. Here we have a large gray bee. I think this is, again, is a digger bee. But I always like the bees when I can get their eye in focus and their antenna in focus. And this particular one shows up really nice. The camera did a good job of, even though it's behind the stigma, still showing up everything really nicely. This very pretty claret cup flower turned out to be a mating site for these digger bees. They said, we like this veranda and we're going to make use of it. Another large digger bee, and kind of that nice deep red colored flower. Sometimes you'll find things like these bot flies that are metallic in color. This is a metallic green one, hanging around and kind of foraging inside the flowers. I suspect they're picking up whatever nectar that they can find in there. And every once in a while, you get a true contrast where you have an orangish flower, and here is a convergent lady beetle, which is just a little bit darker orange, and of course has the spots on it. So it's kind of fun when stuff happens that you don't really expect. And I doubt that I even saw that when I took the picture, and it showed up when I was cropping it to enlarge. And then this is my favorite claret cup cactus over on the east facing slope of Tortugas, because it has perspective. It's found a nice place to live. It's got a view all the way over to the Oregon Mountains, and it's going to be a nice, bright, kind of orangey colored flower when it does emerge. So I'll have to try to find it again this year. One picture only of this little bahia-leaved legume. It's in the pea family, or senna, I should say. It's a senna. Trailing alionia, or windmills, or whatever you like to call these desert windmills, are just impossible not to take photos of. But if you're too far back, it's really hard to bring the entire group of flowers into focus, and you have to try to get a reasonable number of them into focus. And they range in color from sort of a bluish to a bright pink. It's best if you can catch them when the sun is a little bit at an angle so that you can get a truer color. And it's always good to include the leaves. And in this particular plant, the leaves are all fuzzy, and the color texture is nice and sedate, so they really go well together. I always take photos of these. I have so many, I don't know what to do with them all, but I like looking at them, so that's what I do with them. And you can bring it in really close and really have a nice feel. They're in the 4 o'clock family, so you see these nice 3-lobed structures for the petals. And again, I like to get shadows in when I can, so the sun angle is here coming through the photo. Again, these are almost all over the line, or the sedimentary rocks on Tortugas and Bishop's Cap, and there's a fair number of them other places too, but they definitely, you'll see a lot of them on Tortugas. I always like it when I can bring some buds in, some leaves, and in this case, they make a really nice soft background. And I think this was a near dusk photo when I was out taking full moon shots. So again, I like that sort of mellow color as well. Not everything has to be bright like this one, but again, this one I like too. And there's our buddy, honeybee, coming in to feed and get some nectar, get some pollen, and also do some pollinating perhaps. Okay, stickleaf. This is down along the Rio Grande, and these will be flowering maybe about 3 weeks from now. And they're in the group of mentzelias, and you have stick leaves and blazing stars, and all of these have these Velcro-like hairs on them, and they'll stick to your clothing and all of that sort of thing. If you walk through them, the leaves will detach a little bit. And you can tell that they're kind of like Velcro because other plant seeds will stick onto the plants as well when you take a photo. And these are the fruits right here that'll produce the next crop of seeds. But these are kind of a simple 5-petal flower with, I think, 10 stamens, and very photogenic in terms of shooting down on them or across them. And for a yellow flower, it actually photographs well. Now, we're going to convert over to the blazing stars, ones that flower more towards the latter part of the day, late afternoon and into the evening. And these are the buds of some blazing stars. Again, this is one of those flowers that if you're in bright sunshine, it's hard to take a good photo. But if you're, this is waiting near dusk for the sun to set and the moon to rise, and it mellows those yellow colors out. And then we have some nice fruits to go along with it. Again, these are very Velcro-like hairs on the leaves and stems, so they will stick to you. So this is an emerging flower in the middle of the afternoon. And although it turned out reasonably well, you can see how it gets a little bit bleached in that process. These were actually taken out at White Sands, this particular group of blazing stars. And there were enough material around them to help mute the sun. Plus I was out a little later in the afternoon, so these turned out pretty well. And it's always good if you can bring one in close and still have it in focus. Get some shadowing in there. One that's opening, one that's open, and a fruit. Makes for a perfect image in my mind. Guess we could use a leaf, huh? And like to bring them in close when I can. I spent so much of my career looking at things from a distance and looking at aerial photography, and I want to see stuff up close now. And there is the latest foraging honeybee that I've found so far. This was just at sunset. There was just a couple rays of light shining across. And we see we got another plant seed hanging in there, and we got our honeybee filling up for the night. Now, the stinging serpent is a plant that's in the same family with the blazing stars and the stickleaves. And it's real characteristic to see their leaf. They have some spines that stick out that actually have an irritant. So if you get scratched by those, you'll end up itching like crazy. That's the stinging serpent. And then these hairs with the expanded base, kind of yellow color, called pustulate hairs. So it doesn't even sound good. But if you can catch them in the early morning and the late afternoon, they have this super mellow texture and color that I really, really like. In the bright sun, they tend to sometimes overpower the image a little bit, but boy, if you get them in the early and late, I really like the way that texture and color comes out. It's smooth, really smooth. Woolly plantain, we saw them earlier. And here's a whole plant with the leaves and several flowering spikes. It's one of those that, unless you're just zeroing in on a little segment of the spike, you're not going to really get great photos. And this is about the best I can do so far. I'll keep working at it, but Very simple flowers, but long bracts on them. So it makes it a little tougher to focus in on them. You see how this one just faded right out. But they do feed a lot of butterflies. Butterflies love them. This is another species of skipper feeding on the woolly plantain. We even have a fly feeding here. So we get double duty out of that plant. Wire lettuce. This is one up on the observation hill in the nature park. And then there are a lot of them down along the Rio Grande. And you actually see these distributed pretty well across all the volcanic and sedimentary rocks. But if you can take a close up, the flowers are simply gorgeous. The color of the stamens, the length, the way they curl. So you can get one in focus, you're going to have a really, really nice photo. And they are attractive to bees and butterflies. This is a very large gray bee that's finding forage on that flower. And then we have a white butterfly along with that same bee in this portion of the plant. And then here we have a little standoff between the bee and the butterfly. Maybe they're comparing which flower has more nectar or something. I'm not really sure. This might be a checkered butterfly, but again, I'm no lepidopterist, so it'll have to go to someone else to figure that one out. This is out at the Rio Grande. This is a full plant photo there when they're in full flower. And very, very gorgeous. Remember the pocket gopher we saw earlier with the poppies. I actually saw one of these plants wiggling back and forth. And then pretty soon it just went shoop right underground. It was a little smaller than this one. And that was a pocket gopher pulling it under to have a meal. And again, getting a lot of the flowers in focus at the same time is tough, but getting individual ones, particularly when you get this sort of pinkish lavender color, they're just gorgeous. This one is a little more bluish white. So I like messing around with these, and I usually end up with way too many photos, but that's okay too. Here we have one that has completed its flowering, just starting to form fruits. And here we have one that's being visited by a variegated fritillary. They're kind of a medium large orange butterfly. And here we have our traditional honeybee visit. And you can see how much pollen it's been gathering on it, on the various hairs on its body. And this is a bee fly in the genus Villa, or Via, I guess it could be. But they really enjoy feeding on the skeleton weed or wire lettuce as well. I learned it as skeleton weed. And here's another white butterfly. This is either a checkered or a marble, or there's about 5 species of them, and I get them mixed up pretty easily. But this is a nice photo. It's got nice texture. You can see the body hairs on the butterfly. And these guys are out when the temperature is quite cool in the early morning. And I think it's because they have all these nice long soft hairs as insulation. Okay, so then we're going to go to the borage mat plants, and we're going to go through about 3 species. I lost my little prompter up here that has my species name, so I'm just going to have to think of it on the run. And so we'll start with this one. Genus Tequila mostly, and very, very gorgeous tubular flowers. This one is a little brighter purplish blue. Actually, this one is Nama. This is the genus Nama. The other 2 that are coming up are Tequila. But again, if you can zero in on a few flowers, bring them in focus, a few leaves, a bud or 2, that's usually the best way to go with these plants, because there are just too many flowers, too many distances away from the camera. The camera gets easily confused. This is a mat. It's called a mat plant because it lays so close to the ground. And you can see when you take a distance photo how much variation there is vertically in all this flower and leaf cover. But if you can bring them in close, get a couple of leaves, send everything else into the background, That's not a bad photo. This is crinkle mat, and it has a really long hairs that shine, and so it makes this whole thing look just fuzzy as all get out. But the flowers are kind of a light lavender color, and they grow out in the open, and the sun often reflects off of those and confuses the camera a lot. So again, you have to really focus in on a few flowers, and if possible on the shadier part of the plant to get really clear photos. So you do the best you can, but these are tough to take photos of. And you can see again how you have all these different elevations among flowers and leaves, and they love growing in the rocks. So you always have the rocks as the background as well. In this case, these are the sedimentary rocks over on Tortugas. And this is another Tequila species with very long awns on the seeds and the fruits. And when you have the flowers form, you have the long awns coming out below them. It's nice pink color versus sort of a faded whitish pink. Just makes for a gorgeous photo, but again, hard to bring into focus. It's so easy to fool the camera on that much texture and that much bright color. Naked hibiscus. If you ever see one, you'll take a photo of it. That's just the way they are. They're too attractive not to, and they look so out of place, just a single flower sticking up out of some other shrub. There's one that's just unfurling. You can see the stigmas here. And when you get to here's the stigmas, the anthers around them, and then you start seeing this spiral of colors, almost like a little bit of a kaleidoscope thing happening way down in the bottom of that flower. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you can even shoot through stems and leaves and still get a focused flower photo. Sometimes the cameras I use in particular, if they get a little tip of a leaf or a little bit of a stem, they'll focus on that and blur this whole thing into the background. It really happens with bird photos. But again, just a really nice pattern down in the base of the petals on this particular one. So it's one that if you see it, you're going to take a photo of it, I'll guarantee it. Some of them are a little more pinkish colored. And it kind of depends on their exposure. If it's a true south exposure, sometimes the petals are much more spread out. I really like this dark maroon band over the pinkish band in the base of these flowers. And that's probably a pretty young flower just opening up too. And when I can, if I can get clear enough image, here's a beetle feeding, or I think it's a beetle, might be a bee. But get in and view the stamens, look at some pollen grains, anthers hanging out, and then the nice color pattern. I always like to zoom in when I can. Here's the beetle having a little meal around the flower. I don't know exactly, probably eating pollen grains, I would think. Pair of beetles, I think they're different species. And this one really kind of weirded me out. At first, when I saw it, the color and everything says, in the length of the abdomen says, maybe that's a larval katydid. But then as I started looking at that, it says, you know what, that looks like a spider. And so when I got one in good light, got one nice shot, and sure enough, it's this really funky looking long abdomen spider. I don't know what it's called, but it's really pretty, and it's really weird looking to me. And just the length of the spines on its legs and everything, it's you don't want to dream about that when you go to bed, that's for darn sure. Down along the Rio right now, and perhaps of some of the arroyos, the orange mallow is starting to flower. And again, orange mallow is another one of those plants that if you see it, you don't take a picture of it, but you really have to, because of the way the flowers form along the stem, you really need to focus in and bring in a few flowers or a few buds, a leaf and some flowers, and that sort of thing to really make it pop as a photograph, at least in my opinion. Stand back too far, it's a big, tall, wavy plant, and the wind will blow it around real easy. So I go for shadowing and flower plus opening buds, flower plus leaves. And this is one where I played with the brightening in my photo processing and brightened at one level over what the natural color would have been, just to see how it would turn out. But it got a little bit bright. Always, if possible, try to get a leaf to help with identification, but a lot of times it's just not possible to do. These are actually from this spring. These are the last part of March, when this one was flowering down along the river, along the Rio Grande Trail. It's really rare to get two side by side, and the stamens are all in focus. Usually one is just a little bit blurred like this one. Or in this case, this outer one is a little bit blurred. And then you have the really good, and it looks like some ants, maybe a small fly or a bee flying in right there. When you get near the I-10 bridge crossing of the Rio, there's some really significant color changes happen in these mallows. And I don't know if that's a genetic thing or if there's some other thing going on, but they trend to get a little bit pinker. And then there's some that are of what I think is another species, because it has this three-cleft leaf, that are this kind of a really smooth, bluish white color. They're just so gorgeous, it's unbelievable. And I'm always happy when I can get 2 or 3 of them in a row to sort of show that color and texture and just the beauty of those. I think it's a different species, and I'm not sure if that's a common flower color, but it sure is pretty. And these are again along the Rio Grande Trail, about where I-10 crosses over the Rio Grande. So we got them all here. We got the leaf, we got the flower, and we got some old buds that are starting to throw some seeds out. These little patches of hairs you see, if you get them under a microscope, those are called stellate hairs. They look like they're branched on top. They look like stars. These are red ants. Always a lot of red ants around. And some mating bees. They found a nice place to do their business. Here's a very large brown bee, and all of this pollen is stuck on the hairs on its legs, and it's going to take back to its burrow in the ground. And these are a relative of the orange mallow, and I just saw a couple of them flowering the other day, and I've forgotten what their names are. Something to do with fan flowers or something on that order, but very interesting, different flower color, a little bit different texture. And last year I saw one plant of annual tobacco over on Tortugas Peaks. They have these long tubular flowers. And boy, if you want to get your fingers stuck together, these glandular hairs on the annual tobacco will stick you right up. And they have a very strong odor. This is what you'd be smoking if they hadn't legalized recreational marijuana. The small buckwheats, wild buckwheats, this one is over at Bishop's Cap, kind of mat foring, but they are very attractive to butterflies in particular in the early spring. And they tend to flower, maybe about 3 weeks or months from now. And this is the lupin blue butterfly foraging on a wild buckwheat. A little bit better ventral shot of that particular little butterfly. They're really pretty little guys. There's all kinds of blue butterflies though, and or butterflies that are called blues. They're very hard to ID if you don't know them. And this is one just emerging over along Soledad Road that I snapped on Saturday, another species of wild buckwheat. Here we have our desert marigold, everybody's favorite. But you can see what happens when you step away from the plant and try to take a bigger picture. Everything gets just a little bit blurry. So this is one I like to go all in on, because you can't describe how bright yellow it is until you see it up close and personal. Again, try to get the shadow when I can on my images. I usually don't clean up the plant by pulling stuff out of the flower and that sort of thing. And that's just part of nature, to have stuff inside of stuff or around stuff. And this is my attempt at side view. Get a little bit different look at the flower. One of the nice, interesting things about this one, this is a bishop's cap. Got the nice flower, but out here hunting on the petals, this white crab spider. And usually you don't see something like this until you actually process the image. Here's one with a native digger bee, I believe it is, foraging, and then an old one that has already flowered and is forming seeds. And here's a face shot of that same digger bee working its way around. And this is a later in the year shot, but I threw it in anyway just to show you. Here's a flower that's just opening. Here we have a metallic wood boring beetle, fairly large one. It goes all the way across the disc. And then a very pretty fly. It's kind of a light color. It's got pink eyes. It's got spots in the wings. Really odd looking, but pretty fly against that bright yellow. And here we have a little something. I was thinking it might be an ant or something, but who knows, in a flower that's just starting to form the ray flowers. And we have the full disc flowers, but none of them have opened yet either. All right, trailing chromaria. This is really a beautiful plant. I always tried to get great photos of it, but for some reason, the curvature of the petals, the shine off of the petals, because it's usually in full sun, all that kind of defeats me. But every once in a while, I'll get one that turns out reasonably well. And a close-up that is passable. There's a little bit of blurriness there, but this is one that's just recently opened, and the stamens show up really well, as do the petals and the sepals around it, and even a nice touch on the hairs. So this is a little bit of a challenge flower for me, like a lot of them are, but I'm getting better. And here we have a bunch of buds and a fairly well-focused flower to go along with it. These are real common on Bar Canyon Trail, along that trail. And then also there are some on Tortugas on the east-facing slope. Trying to get a cluster of flowers in focus is tough. This is about the best I'm able to do with my cameras. And then these are just openings, so you see very deep color. Here's the outside sepal still enclosing most of the stamens, but there's a stamen starting to show. Really pretty purple hairs with little glands on top of them. So if you can get those in good focus, that helps an image out as well. Color is hard to describe, but kind of a purple. And these are the little amaranths that grow out there, the globe flowers, the globe flowered amaranth. And you'll find these along the in Soledad Canyon and along that Bar Canyon Trail. And it's always cool when you see them, because they don't look right for some reason. They just seem a little weird looking, at least to me. But I always like taking pictures of them because they come into focus really well. And they're real attractive to butterflies in particular. There's a nice stack of two flower clusters. And then here's our Dury's metal mark, the rare butterfly, the endemic butterfly, feeding on one. This might be the first observation of that actual happening. I sent it over to a butterfly guy, so So he'll tell me if that's the case. These guys are really cool too. They're in the potato family, the Solanaceae, and they have a really long name that doesn't sound very nice, but I really enjoy taking photos of them because you can get both leaves, you can get flowers, you get buds, and a really unusual color pattern on them. If you're really lucky, you can get the stamens extended towards you in focus and the rest of the flower in focus, which, and as well as leaf tips, which is really an achievement for my camera to be able to pull one like that off. Again, I like to capture a bud when I can. Be nice if the flower were more in focus, but at least the anthers are in focus along with the bud. But it gives you a whole different feel with a little bit of rock up here and a little bit of leaves in the background. Makes for a nice composition. Really like the little star pattern in the middle. When you bring it in close, everything's in focus. You get really nice stamen structure as well. Side angle looks really good. I didn't quite get the anthers in well, but I think I have one a little later on that does show those at a side angle a little better. And here we go. This is my favorite side angle shot that I've taken of this plant. And these grow along the rocks. I see the most of them, well, along any trail, Dripping Springs Trail, Bar Canyon, but I like taking photos of them over on Tortugas because the rock's a little lighter color behind them. Again, we have a really nice flower, well focused, and here's our funky green spider hanging out trying to catch something. And this is another one where I didn't see that spider when I took the image, but it showed up when I processed it. A pair that stayed in focus, and several. So it's always good when you can get a few of them to hang in there for you. You can use the rock to your advantage when you're focusing in, and just have a lot of fun with it. And also use the shade of a rock or something like that, which mellows out the colors versus bright sun. One that's just opening, so all the colors are a little darker. And you can tell I like taking pictures of this one because I got a whole bunch of them. And then just the color pattern now, that dark color usually only extends to about here. Here we have it all the way across the petals. It's always interesting to me to see the amount of change that happens. Oaks, they're pretty standard. They have catkins and new leaves coming out, the scrubby oaks. But taking pictures of acorns is kind of fun. So even though the flowers don't look all that great, I do like taking pictures of some acorns, especially if you can bring them in focus really well with the leaves. And it's just different texture, a whole different thing. And sometimes insects will injure a leaf and a gall will form on the leaf. And so taking insect gall photos, there probably is a larvae inside that gall, if I remember correctly. New Mexico agave. You've all seen that one and hopefully haven't backed into one because they are sharp and stout. Here we have one that's just starting to form a flowering stem in front of a sotol. This is actually right on the top of Tortugas. And then over in Soledad Canyon, here's one with the flowering spike a little bit taller. These happen in May. Typically the flowers just beginning to emerge. Here they are in bud stage. And once they open up, and you all recognize the La Cueva rocks and the little trail that goes down and around the La Cueva rocks. Well, this one is right up near the road to use those as a backsplash as well as the organs up here. This one has a few flowers that are open. Most of them are in bud stage. But when the flowers get open like this, if you really look close, you can see all the bees hanging out. These things are covered with bees and wasps and butterflies and hummingbirds. And you name it, there's something feeding somewhere within those flowers. See here, a bee, that's a wasp. something right there. This is actually one of the best plants to get hummingbird photos off of if there are any around. And this is the agave bug, very, very large bug. This one's happened to be hiding on a soto leaf. It saw me coming down the trail and hopped up into the soto. But typically they forage and feed on the juice of agave, but they're very large. And they're tough to get into focus because they have such a long body. You got the long antennas, got the legs that come up, spread out, everything else. So I'm really pleased with this photo. Apache plume, these are just flowering right now. So if you go down, drive Soledad Road, look down the arroyos or up to Dripping Springs, you'll find lots of Apache plume shrubs in flower. Down along the arroyos, they just get more moisture. And they're really attractive to insects. This one's in bud stage. We have a convergent lady beetle. Here's one that's flowered, got the fruit tails, but again, we've got our lady beetle hunting around on them. Makes for a nice, interesting contrast, something you don't see every day. Of course, one that's just finished flowering, one that is flowering, always makes for a good composition. And if you get some shadows, just even subtle shadows like this of the anthers, it's really cool for a lot of photos. Very attractive to white butterflies. Again, I think this is a checkered white feeding on a newly opening flower. And then we have some fruit tails that are sticking out as well as a bud. So it's kind of a full composition photo. There's a little close up. You can see the eye detail as well as antennas are pretty well detailed on that butterfly. Again, we have our digger bee feeding on these flowers. And in my opinion, taking pictures or images of the fruit tails are just as fun and just as pretty, maybe even prettier, certainly more texture than just the flowers. And you can play around with sun angles, you can play around with densities and all sorts of things with these, or you can just take an individual and let it be well lit and let it shine. And then who can resist ocotillo, those bright red flowers against a really dry landscape? And a little later on, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, if there's enough moisture, they'll develop leaves in a whole different looking plant with leaves. But you can take them from the bud stage and make a nice photo. Always beautiful against the blue sky. Here we have a partial bud, partial flower stage with a few leaves. Stem has a lot of character. So you always, I think, should try to get some spines, a little bit of the stem to go along with buds and open flowers. And this is the slope of Tortugas Mountain right here. So we get the sky and the slope behind that particular flower. Getting close-ups can be a little dicey because the anthers in the stamens are so long that shoot away. Always use the sky to your advantage, in my opinion, on this particular one. And these are attractive to insects. In this case, over in the nature park, here we have a partial bud, partial flowering stage, and a ventral wing of a black swallowtail butterfly. Very, very beautiful. And everything's in focus, the antennas, the head and eyes, the body, and then the wing in the various colors, even the bottom wing and part of the top wing. And these are the kind of photos I just really, really enjoy taking, but they don't happen very often. Here we have a taconid fly that's feeding on whatever it can find. And that's what a taconid fly looks like. And they're the ones that buzz around your head and try to feed on your sweat when you're walking around and all that sort of thing. Here we have last year, there was a very big hatch of cicadas, and these things are between 3 and 4 inches long. If you go from tip to tip. Very large cicadas. This is called Townsend's haddoa on a ocotillo stem. Ocotillo stems make great perches for black-throated sparrows, the most common sparrow you'll see out there. And a very elegant looking perch and pose on that ocotillo with some fruits in the background. And the reason it's perched there is because it's got a nest in the short shrub down below. And don't worry, this egg wasn't cracked. It had just lined its nest with a whole lot of long hairs, probably from a horse's mane or tail that were out and about wherever it happened to find them. But a 3-egg nest in a short shrub below an ocotillo. And it serves as a perch for a migrating orchard oriole. This one was singing in the spring of 2019. Very melodious song. And I took a really long shot with a 150 millimeter lens, and fortunately it actually came out pretty clearly. So I'm always pleased when something like that happens as well. But again, an ocotillo is a perch for a bird. A lot of butterweeds around, or senecio. This is called the flaccid one. You can see how it kind of droops and falls over itself, and really kind of a lackluster, sort of lazy kind of flower and plant. So you kind of got to like it. It's kind of a slouch. You kind of got to like the slouchy ones. And you can even make a wallpaper shot of them if you get a dense enough individual. This is a different species of senecio or butterweed. And since we're going yellow, this is the golden aster, the yellow golden aster that is very common in the mountains. There's also some species down along the river. And in mid to late summer, these things just take off, and they're very, very common. You can see this little spine on the filiary and a wide open yellow flower there of the golden aster. And all of these are attractive to various bugs. Actually, that's a beetle. Very attractive to bee flies. This is a villa bee fly feeding on a golden aster. In the late season, this anthracene bee fly is really attracted to the golden asters. This is the dogweed that I was able to find a line of them growing along the edge of a rock to make the whole thing look a little more interesting. This is so common. Right now, if you walked on Tortugas Mountain, this would be if you counted individual flowers, this would be the most common flower you'd find. There's one I took Saturday. The reason being, I have more than enough flowers of this plant, or photos of this plant, but such nice shadow against that light colored rock. Here we have a marine blue butterfly that's foraging on the dogweed flower. I don't know exactly which shrub this is, yellow flowered composite, but here we have that metal mark that may be some kind of a hybrid. This is up in Soledad Canyon. Another picture of the metal mark with its wings spread a little bit further as it feeds among the flowers. Whoa, guess who's coming up? Ah, I bet you're all about to go crazy now, aren't you? Our little virgin sure isn't afraid to express the feelings out there. So I'm going to try to get with it. We're going to get into the really good cacti now as we go along. A plant with all disc flowers, a composite with all disc flowers, no ray flowers, is Chenactus. This one, particular one, is on Tortugas. And very interesting to take photos of, because if you really look at it, those sure look like coronaviruses. So please don't stomp this plant out if you can see it in the field. You're so enraged with the last year we've put in. Let it be. It's friendly. Climbing milkweeds. It's real interest for me. I first saw masses of climbing milkweed along the Rio, climbing up over the willows. And so to find them also out in the desert climbing over creosote bush is kind of interesting too. So you got those two very diverse habitats where milkweed, the climbing milkweed, hang out. And these are just such a natural attractant to bees and wasps and butterflies. And if it's got legs and can fly, it's going to be on these these climbing milkweeds, and I have an array of photos. Milkweeds have very unique flowers. I went into quite a bit of detail in June explaining about the flowers that it has, but to try to get the whole cluster in focus can be a bit of a challenge, particularly on a side view. So usually you just try to take in a few flowers and make a very clear image of those with this particular plant. And guess who shows up? There's our buddy, the honeybee, just digging right in, trying to get some nectar from that flower, but also pick up some of these bags of pollen that are unique to milkweed and end up pollinating other flowers. Actually, these are some of the pollen bags right here on the tip of its toe with another honeybee on a climbing milkweed. This is a little skipper. It's called a sachem, another form of butterfly. And you can see it's got its proboscis down and tapping nectar out of the flower. This is one from along the river, and very, very beautiful umbels, flowers. Very easy to pull in and get a close-up of them. Painted lady feeding on the climbing milkweed. Here's one with the dorsal view of the wings. Queen butterflies. The queens really love feeding on the climbing milkweed along the river. This is our black swallowtail. This is a female on the dorsal view, and you can see how extensive the milkweed flowers can be. This is the desert milkweed, forms a big globose cluster of flowers, same structure as the climbing milkweed flowers, but very different look. And I'm not sure exactly what feeds on them because I've never seen insect visitors on this particular species. This is white flowered composite called Rose Heath. This particular one is along Bar Canyon Trail over in Soledad Canyon area. They're very attractive white flowers and a little bit dainty looking, actually. They're real pleasant to look at, even though they are white, the yellow centers. But I haven't really picked up any insect visitors yet, so that'll be a goal for this species. Then the long-flowered Gilia, the long tubular, these are along Jornada Road, but anywhere where you have sandy, undisturbed, relatively undisturbed plant communities, even right here in Las Cruces, you're going to find this flower along about April. But because it's so long, so tubular, so broad, and all of that good stuff, it's really tough to bring more than one flower into focus at a time. So my best advice is just to keep shooting, and maybe once in a while you're going to have a flower that works, a photo that works for you. But these are the best I've been able to do so far, which is pretty disappointing, actually. Little ground growing rattlesnake weed, or it is actually a spurge. And if you would break this stem or break a leaf off, it would bleed latex. So it has a very white sap. But the rattlesnake weed always has this big maroon spot in the middle of the leaf. And then the flower, when you see a lot of them together, is really not that unattractive to see a whole mat of this white and maroon color. Again, Jornada Road area for this one. Okay, let's get some cactus in. Go out to White Sands right at the end of April. And right in this area where you have a dune face, and then you have the start of this plain, in here you see these little red tops. This is another one of the claret cup relatives, but it's called a king cup. Very stout spines, very tall hedgehog cactus, and really a deep red flower, deep red buds amongst some really strong spines. It's well worth the drive to go out and find these at the end of April. This one even has a little bit of celia right there. But you see this whole mass of flowers, whole mass of buds. You can just see how, well, it's gorgeous now, but when it's in full flower, it'd be just amazing splash. And again, my favorite kind of shot where you have partially open flower with buds. And this is right on the entry road as you leave the ranger station and drive into the park before you get to that first major turnout to the left, or that lake turnout before you get there is where these occur. And it's just like the claret cups. Every next cactus is prettier than the last one you were at. Plus you get to be at White Sands. And again, this is my favorite kind of photo from this particular group and this particular species or subspecies, I guess. Fendler's cactus, Fendler's hedgehog. Now these bloom about right at the front end to the middle of May. And there are some showing buds. I think Gordon showed me one that had a bud that looked like it was ready to flower already. It was about this size. Very beautiful lavender colored hedgehog flowers. And again, I like to take bud pictures, one that's still closed and one with just a little bit of the stigma showing. These are some of my favorite kind of pictures. Fendler's hedgehog cactus. And it's one of those that in the wrong light, every photo will kind of bleach out. Sometimes you get lucky on a top shot like this, where actually all the petals kind of overlay in like scales on a fish. And then you have a really nice shot all the way to the bottom of the flower. This is a fairly long, slightly tubular flower. And it's tough sometimes to get into the bottom of it without blurring the petals or vice versa. Or if you get two side by side, to bring both sets of stigmas in focus is really tough. Here's one with two that are just opening and one that's been open a little longer. And to get three in a row with the stigmas in focus is pretty much unheard of. So I'm really pleased with that photo. Side photos give you an idea of the depth of these flowers and a whole different look at the color palette that each one distributes. There's a digger bee making a meal out of some nectar and pollen, probably. Here's looking at you. This time the stigma came in focus, but the bee was blurred out a little bit in its little white face. I think that the cameras I use tend to focus on green. So if there's anything green, it tends to go right for it. Now, oftentimes you'll go out and you'll see one flower or maybe a few flowers that are all munched down. All the petals are munched down, the stigmas are gone. And they were probably munched down when they were about at this stage right here. And I'm thinking that's probably small mammals, perhaps mice or kangaroo rats or something like that. That would take those down. Okay, who doesn't like a haystack cactus or a strawberry cactus? These grow mostly on sedimentary rocks. So you'll find them on Tortugas, Bishop's Cap, and I believe at least one has appeared on Picacho Mountain, where some of the sedimentary rocks are there. But call them haystacks because they kind of do look like a haystack. You can tell which side of the plant is facing the sun if you look at the flower pattern. And when you see them fully in flower, it's really hard to believe. These are as you're walking up the trail on the west face of Tortugas towards the top. Just an amazing display. These are very large flowers. So to get this many large flowers in focus tells you that they definitely have a lot of detail in them. And sometimes they're this magenta color, sometimes they're kind of a bright pink, and sometimes they get a little bit purplish in color. What I like is to do individual ones try to get other elements like the Socatillo stem, but to make sure you get detail all the way around in the petals and in the stigma and in the anthers. And then the color shift as you go down from a darker red to pink. Even the little frilly edges on some of the petals. It's fun when you can pull that in with your camera. Clusters are always great. Really, really difficult to get all the flowers in focus at once though. Individuals, you can't beat an individual that's as pretty as that one. But there's a prettier flower on the next one you see. And I like looking for odd stuff. So I always kick around and look at plants that aren't right along the trail. A couple of years ago, I saw these haystack or strawberry cactus. They had all green anthers and stamens. And so odd looking, it was almost like, I don't know, some sort of a ghost thing. And here are the stigmas. I believe it's probably something like a viral or a fungal infection. Excuse me. So if you look around, Tortugas will teach you new lessons. Here we have the chocolate daisy, the Berlandi area. It's real common around the visitor center. But these are out on Bar Canyon Trail. They're a different, pretty yellow flowered plant. And then the prickly pears. Got 3 species of prickly pear listed. And I think I've divided them out pretty well here. These are the Engelmans. But they always give me a headache because they seem like they cross. There's a lot of hybridization or something going on with them. So the best of my ability, these are the Engelmans. Real common on Tortugas and on the little hill at the nature park up around Dripping Springs trails. Really nice green stigma, and then the yellow of the flowers is really interesting. If you get them in bright sun, they kind of do one thing. If you get them in a little bit of shade, they mellow out a lot, and it's really easy to get lots of buds associated with them. Again, I like opening buds, especially when I can get the stigma in them. So I mess around taking way too many of those kind of pictures. Here's a nice full sun shot. So you see a little bit of glistening off the petals. And then at Tortugas, there's an arroyo and just before the sand dunes. And there's some pretty large plants growing down there. And that's where these images are from. And so you get a little shade on them, they really mellow out, mellow yellow. A threefer. A stack. And fruits, if I can, I like to go out later in the year and take some fruit pictures and try to get the whole gamut of what that plant is doing. And guess who's feeding on them? There's our honeybee and a whole bunch of beetles. And here's a hunter, an assassin bug, just waiting for somebody to come in, and he's going to grab them for lunch. And I actually did have one photo of an Engelmann's prickly pear where a larval katydid, what's called a bush katydid, was going in to feed. And katydids are horrible to try to get into focus. So I'm glad this one mostly got into focus. And they have these huge long antennae that you're never ever going to get in a single frame. So I'm kind of pleased actually with that little photo. Okay, now we're going to look at some purple spine head punches or prickly pears. And they tend to have a very white or light yellow stigma, and then typically are yellow and red color, but all the color variations that you can imagine occur in these populations around town. Here's one that's pure yellow, but they have the very light stigmas and you got the purplish long needles. Here's my bud photo, but they're very, very pretty. And you see a lot of them used horticulturally around town as well. Just this deep maroon, bright yellow, and then a light yellow colored stigma. This one is actually getting towards an apricot color. And this one's nearly pure yellow, just opening. All the pollen grains in there. No wonder all the critters like to come in and feed. This one is a pure apricot colored one. Actually, the last group of these prickly pears is called the tulip prickly pear. The difference will be this is a light colored stigma, and on the tulip prickly pears, which also gain about the same color, we'll see them just a little bit later, have a dark green one stigma, just like the Engelmann prickly pear. So I get a really big headache when I go through a bunch of prickly pear images and try to figure out what they are. And maybe there's an easier way to do it, but I haven't learned it yet. This is kind of almost an orangey, a tangerine type color. This is, I think, is a double flower, because if you look at all the stigmatic surfaces here, it looks like two flowers combined in the bud or something like that. Some genetic thing went on, but it's a gorgeous flower with so much volume. And this one is just as pasty clear. It's almost like looking through skin when the sun shines against it. Lyre-leaf bahia. Very light colored orangish one versus a more typical colored one, all in the same plant. Here's the tax stem. See all the glandular hairs. And there's our honeybee. And our digger bee. So we're going to clean this flower out. We like it. And here's a very large gray bee, some very pretty big gray eyes. It looks kind of like a bee that they call a glorious protoxia bee. Their insect guys are really good at naming stuff, but I'm not sure if that's the case, but it's probably one of the digger bees. Okay, now we're getting into that tulip prickly pear. You can see how the stigmas are a little greener, a little darker green, even though the flower colors are very similar to the color of the purple spine, but see how dark green those stigmas are. And this is where I just find it really tough to tell these things apart. So these are just guesses on my part on the tulip, but they still have pretty flowers. Especially like these apricot colored ones when they trend toward almost a tangerine-ish color. And these just kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, maybe a butterscotch with going into orange, and you get the right sun on them. They're just pretty. That's all there is to it. And fruits. And then you can never go wrong taking pictures of thistles. And this is one that has already flowered and it's forming its fruits and little tufts are coming out. And we have one that's fully open here. This one is just starting to open. So you see all the disc flowers getting ready to go, the spines on the sepals. So there's so much texture and there's so much color and all these variable colors in between. Like I say, you just cannot go wrong taking pictures of thistles, and it's usually pretty easy to bring them into focus, even when you're trying for a bud in a flower, or looking at the disc flowers that haven't opened yet versus the ones that are open around. And this is a great place to find butterflies and bees and hummingbirds when you're out in the field. If you have a number of these flowers around, you're going to be visited by lots of insects. But unfortunately, all of the insect photos I have, including tiger swallowtails, the big yellow butterflies, for these, I took with a snapshot camera, and they just don't have the quality that I would show to anyone besides myself. This nice little pink one was out at the canyon, or the Uvas Mountains, just a little bit further west in Picacho Mountain. And here we have something that might be beetles mating, so maybe I do get an insect on one of them, but I sure can't tell what it is. Along the Soledad Canyon Trail and also Achenbach Canyon trails, there are some white delphiniums, white-ish delphiniums, and they're real fun to try to photograph because they're so tall and linear, and then there's so much volume. To try to bring the whole thing into focus is tough, but sometimes you can get individual flowers, clumps of stamens, that sort of thing, into pretty good focus. But this just gives you an idea of what those those look like. And most people are used to delphiniums being in the blue color range or purple color range. So to see white ones, they may be Nuttalls or Fremonts, I'm not sure. I haven't really looked at the taxonomy on this for a while. And in the bud stage, so it's nice to get at least one photo where I get a decent flower, decent buds. And then this is my close-up attempt where I could, on a new flower that's unfurling, pretty good shot of the stamens, reasonable shot of the petals and the spur. But some plants you just do the best you can with in trying to photograph them. Sometimes the effort to find them and just look at them in the field is enough. Berkelia shrubs are pretty cool. When they go into flower, usually in the middle part of spring, a little later, butterflies come from everywhere. Here we have 4 whites and a variegated fritillary. And here's a pair of whites, probably checkered whites, but again, what do I know? But these, again, flowers are all disc flowers. There are no rays of those flowers. And it's just always good if you can get a butterfly in fair focus. A lot of times the whites keep their wings up all the time. So to get one with the dorsal view, as it's called, is always a coup when you're shooting for butterfly photos. Variegated fritillary is pretty common, and they are definitely around. This is a little bit better. You can see how with age, they tend to get tattered a little bit, so you don't always get the perfect butterfly, but then who's perfect? Here we have a gray hair streak feeding, and a really interesting black and reddish assassin bug. And this assassin bug is ready to have a gray hair streak meal, it looks like. It's interesting to get the flowers in focus, the assassin bug's fully in focus, and then the gray hair streak is mostly in focus. Not as good as I'd like, but that's a nice little composition. Here's our drone fly again, the same one we saw feeding on the early flowering cactus on a different species of Berkelia. This is the one that's kind of colored like a honeybee. Right now, the honey mesquite are just beginning to, they have flower buds. They're going to be flowering just any time now. And I really like this one because it had so much character, so I threw it in just for the heck of it. But here's Saturday what the flower buds look like over along Baylor Canyon Road, or Baylor Pass Road, whatever it's called. And so I think in another few days, you're going to see lots of mesquite flowering. Mesquite are very deep rooted, so they may even be tapping into groundwater in the arroyos that they live. Very attracted to them are female carpenter bees. And so it's not uncommon to see these huge black bees, shiny black bees with feeding on mesquite flowers. And then the fruits are very valuable to lots of different wildlife as they form and mature. I always like to try to get fruit photos. So I try to follow plants all the way through their flowering period through the fruiting period when I can, and just snap a few. I just think it makes it more interesting to know more about the plant. This is a cousin, or maybe a closer than a cousin to the honey mesquite, the screw bean. And here's one in full flower. These are really super for hummingbirds as well as wasps and bees, but you can see how the fruit is coiled. That's why they call it a screw bean. There's a little close-up of the flower. Catkin, actually. Somebody's feeding back here. I don't know what. And then here's a little closer shot of the fruits, and they're all coiled up. And that's why they call it a screw bean, because they look like the shreds of a screw. But some of the best hummingbird habitat I've seen are those mesquites. And here's the Janusia, or the propeller flower, which you see, this one I think is on the hill out at the nature park, but I've also seen them on tortugas. Very, very difficult to photograph, very, very difficult to bring into focus because there's so much going on with them. So when I get an image like this, I'm relatively pleased. And this, like this one, is about the best I can do for the most part, because they're so reflective. To get a nice fruit is always fun too, because of the structure of it. But it's really tough to bring that whole flower into focus for me, and maybe others have a whole lot better way to do it. So if I can get one flower in focus, one fruit in focus, and the rest of them just hanging out in the background, I'm good with that until I get better. Desert zinnia, the white flowered form, they are flowering in some spots right now. I actually saw a couple out there on Saturday. These were from the year before, and again out at the nature park, and then down in the sandy area below Tortugas are really good places to look for them. Kind of scraggly petals, or or ray flowers, excuse me. And then the disc flowers are kind of scraggly too, but they are pretty cool when you see them in a big mound. And then also they're super attractive. Insects are super attracted to them. Again, it's tough to get more than a couple of flowers in good focus when you're doing shots on these. And so you try to maybe focus in on one or two and leave the rest go. Here we see the underwing, or the ventral wing, of a variegated fritillary feeding. Well, not quite feeding. He's got his proboscis coiled up, but perching. You have to call them perching when they're not feeding, or nectaring. Then there's the golden zinnia. And you'll see this along Dripping Springs trails and Bar Canyon and Soledad Canyon trails. Very bright color. Here we have a digger bee that's honing in on it, going to get something to eat. Again, it's another one that, here's a beetle foraging on that one. It's another one that is tough to bring into focus just because of the weirdness of the flower. But when you do, it's a good one. Uh-oh, guess who's coming up now? Oh dear, our burden just says, I've just about had enough of this stuff. Okay, well, we just passed our last full moon, so we're going into the tail end of this discussion. Just to bring everybody's spirits up, here's another happy Chihuahuan raven telling the world what he thinks of it, and just out having fun. Now we're going to get into some real cacti. This is called a pancake cactus. I was fortunate a couple of years ago to catch it early in the spring before the critters got to the fruits. So I was able to get a photo that showed the cactus, which has emerged from the ground, the fruits of the year before, and the new buds from this flowering year. Now these cactus shrink in the wintertime, and you can't see them on the surface because they're kind of covered with gravel and all that sort of thing. One of the common names for the pancake cactus, and not a very pleasant one, is called the horse crippler. because I assumed that if a horse stepped on top of one of those and those spines came up into the tender part of the inside of its hoof, it would do a number. Now here we have 5 flowers on this same plant, and you can see it's kind of I don't know, what would you even call that color? Sort of a little fleshy colored, and then the light green stigmas filling out, but I don't know what to call that color. So it's kind of a creamish, brownish, tannish color. I'll let somebody else figure that one out. This is one along Achenbach Canyon Trail, and I took this image last year, but it only had a single flower. Very hard to see these cacti because they're right at ground surface. If they don't have a flower, sometimes you can tell them by this puff of hairs right in the middle. You see that hair tuft and you kind of say, is that a flower? And you go over and look, and sure enough, it's not, but at least you found your pancake cactus. And you can see another one just open here right there. So I haven't seen very many of those. You're seeing just about all the types of photos I have for this particular species. I really like the clarity in this one. These are a little bit out of focus, but what is in focus is nice and clear. So here was my favorite of last year. This is Viscid Acacia, lower slope of east-facing slope of Tortugas. And these things are tall shrubs. They get up, probably 10, 15 feet at the tallest. And really fun to take photos of. They have the nice globose clusters of flowers. The nice long white spines to go along with them. They tell you you're not going to run through us. And then I tried a couple of wallpaper type photos, but they're a little bit weird looking, so I don't know if I would actually use that in any rooms in my house. And I even tried brightening at one level, and came up with this sort of effect from a slight brightening of the photos. But the really nice thing about this is, well, number one, as Gordon pointed out to me yesterday, is the odor. That's just a very fragrant, pleasant smelling acacia. And then when you came up to it, just this huge buzzing noise, or buzzing sound. I refuse to call it noise, but it did actually block out some traffic out on Dripping Springs Road. So it was loud enough to do that. And the reason there was so much buzzing is because there was a big hatch of cicadas, 2 different species. This one is called the cactus dodger, has a really pretty spotted eye. And then the other one is called Townsend's Haddoa, and I'll have some photos of that coming up. And then it intrigued me that they have little parasites. They look like red spider mites maybe hanging out on them. But this critter is probably just under 4 inches long, and then probably about 1.25 inches across. Very, very large cicadas. So I had a lot of fun trying to take good photos of these, bring them into focus, because they're such a long and large insect. Plus you get this kind of bicolor thing going on. So a challenge to take a photo of, but I had a lot of fun with these. I spent way more time in these acacia stands than I ever would otherwise. And this is Townsend's Haddoa. They have a pure black eye. If you remember on the cactus dodger, it had this nice spotted gray and black eye. And then the color pattern, the whole color palette of the Haddoa is a lot lighter and more white. But again, it's about the same length, just under 4 inches, and he's not going to kiss any other cicadas. He's got bugs on his nose. So felt sorry for the little guy trying to attract a mate, and you got red bugs on your nose. What kind of deal is that? But it's really nice when you can bring in a flower cluster, a just opening flower cluster, and a critter into pretty good focus, and even up here some thorns in pretty good focus. So I always like photos like this where everything kind of works out. And again, you can't describe the amount of buzzing going on in these stands. I actually recorded some, but I didn't attach any recordings to this. And then if you catch the sun just right on the wings, you can see these little glints of shine from the sun. And that just, to me, that just adds to the, the value of the photo for me. Also, here's a group of buds that haven't opened yet. And here we have a little species of blue butterfly. I think you have to call it perching. I don't think it can actually forage on or nectar on those yet. So I think it's just kind of resting. And the fruits, always follow up on later in the season to see what they look like. And they're kind of a thin, jointed sort of fruit. Now everybody knows what that is because it's the middle of one of these, which is the prickly poppy. And you can see how spiny the fruits are on the prickly poppy and how sharp those are. And if you break a stem or a leaf on a prickly poppy, the sap will be bright yellow. So you have very yellow sap inside of these. You can always tell when it's a windy day. This day, the wind is blowing about 40 miles an hour because part of the flower is flipped over. They don't really look that flat. Normally, they look more like this. And I like this composition because it has some shade involved in it. And both sets of stamens and anthers are in focus, which is sometimes hard to do when you're at this kind of angle. Actually, all the time, it's hard to do. But the stems are spiny, everything's spiny on it. And, calling it a prickly poppy is a pretty darn good common name for it. But I always stop to look at them and usually stop and take pictures and that sort of thing. Now you get into some of the sandy areas along washes, you get on some flats, kind of scattered around, you're going to find this cane cholla. This one is fully in flower adjacent to a creosote bush. And again, I like to try to do the bud type photo with just a little bit of the stigma if I can, or a little bit more of the stigma, get a little chunk of it sticking out. A double bud is even tastier. And this flower is still opening, so I'm always impressed by the amount of pollen that is on these cactus flowers. It's just unbelievable. This lighter pink flower is actually one from White Sands. And again, just massive amounts of pollen. And you can see all the grains out in here. And I really like it when the photo comes up with enough detail to see that sort of stuff. Always a white stigma with yellowish anthers. And the color range, the color palette seems to be this light pink to kind of a deep pink. Although I did take one photo of one which may have been an escape horticultural one that is almost purple. But I like it when too I can get some shade on the subject and you can have some brightness, the petal colors, and then this darkness in the middle, but you can still see the detail. I really like photos like that. This is the one that I think might have been a horticultural escape. It was actually over by the arroyo on the college campus. So I think that's just a little too dark to be a natural cane cholla. This is about the darkest I've ever seen any of them. This one was over by Ickenbach Canyon, the turn into the Ickenbach Canyon. Here's a nice big digger bee, and look at all the pollen it's gathered on the hairs on its legs to take back home. Another one, little less pollen. Excuse me. This is the only one of these I've seen. It's one of the beehive cactuses, and it's called the long tubercle. You can see this is a tubercle. It's very long and slender. So this is the only one I've ever seen flowering. It's over on the west-facing slope of Tortugas. And these are just a couple of representative flowers that actually all came in focus. And it's a little unusual for me to see a beehive cactus here that has yellow flowers, because most of them are very brilliant pink. There's a little digger bee having some fun, eating some pollen up for some nectar. And then we're going to my all-time favorite. Actually, I've got two of my all-time favorites here. I really like Turk's cap flowers. And I stumbled upon these rain lilies one time about 5 days after we had a big rain in Las Cruces. I went out on Tortugas thinking that it might have gotten some cactus involved in flowering. And instead, I found all these little yellow flowers, just tons of them all over the west-facing slope. And figured out it was a rain lily, and was actually lucky enough to get a little group along with a Turk's cap flower together. And it's really nice when you get something like that going. Here's a little rain lily in the shadow of a pencil cholla or a Christmas cholla with some shadowing. So it's kind of nice to get them in that kind of a situation. Really interesting thing about these rain lilies is that they really do grow year round, and they collect energy year round. So if they've got the moisture, they will flower. And it's usually right dead center in June when they flower, right around the 15th. One day there'll be about maybe 5% of the population in flower. The next day, about 90%. And then the following day, there'll be about 5% again. And that's it for the flowering period, very tight. And throughout the year, part of the stem remains green, collects energy, but the remainder of the stem shrivels up, but stays connected. And so you have all this brown stem laying out on the ground beyond it. This was actually 2 years ago, about 5 days after a really big rain at Tortugas Peak. You can still see the moist soil, which is something we would really pay dearly for right now. Sometimes you'll see a double flowers together, but I think these are two individual plants that the seeds just happen to grow at the same time. Here's a vertical shot into those showing the stamens. For some reason, I'm just really attracted to this plant. I've been following this population, and Gordon showed me a few plants out on Picacho Mountain last year, which is another reason for thinking Picacho has a lot more sedimentary rock exposed than you might imagine. But it's unusual that you see a flower open and another one will flower the next day. Usually they all just pop at one time. Again, here you can see the detail with the pollen grains. Usually all I see are things like digger bees that might be inside one of these flowers, but for the most part, I haven't seen that many insects utilizing this flower source, but somebody must. You can see I get way too carried away taking photos, but I really like this guy or gal. After that flower period, about 8 to 10 days, this is what the fruits look like. These big 3-lobe fruits, they're really pretty, dark green stripe. Inferior ovary, so it retains the old flower parts up here on top. And this is 3 together, which means there are probably 3 separate plants that grew in a clump from 3 separate seeds, because typically I believe there's only one flower. But then you go about another week to 8 or 10 days, and these fruits start to dry on the carpels, and they split all the way open, and all the little seeds, which are very flat and quite round, are stacked in here like poker chips, I guess is what I would say. And the wind just whips them up out of there and blows them across the landscape. Here's one right here. And then they catch up against a rock or up against a cactus pad or an ocotillo stem. And then once they get covered with a little soil, they're ready to go. And this is the old used seed pod. For some reason, there's always a hole in them, and I don't know why. I don't know if that's something with an insect or something else. But these form right after, or this is what it looks like right after the seeds blow out of it. And then these are gone within just a couple of days. And I think maybe small mammals might eat them, or maybe it's just the wind breaking them off, blowing them around. There's a little digger bee feeding on one rain lily. this is definitely among my favorite flowers that I've seen. Okay, fishhook cactus. You like pink? We got pink. This is a little group of Graham's fishhook cactus on Tortugas again, but you can find them on good populations on Picacho Mountain, and I'm sure in other places as well. Those the ones I'm familiar with. Very distinctive. They tend to grow under shrubs up against large rocks, and just real prodigious flowers. Once they get underway, they start usually early in June to mid-June. And the flowers, of course, are in a circle. So that means sometimes you can get them in focus, and sometimes you just have to concentrate on maybe just one little group of them to get good focus on them. They're a multi-lobe cactus, so you always see them in situations like this, or maybe you might see a few single stems, but for the most part, they're lobe stems. It's always good when you can get something like ocotillo and rocks and some flowers peeking out. I really like this kind of composition, and you can see the fishhook spine really well in this one, and see why it's named a fishhook. Here's a little group that came into focus with the stigma protruding, kind of a greenish, and then really dark yellow stamens. And then the petals have this kind of pink center and whitish around. It reminds me of the old creamsicles we used to buy at the grocery store, kind of that mellow blend of pink and white colors. A vertical that actually, or a side view that actually worked out really well. And even the spine, the fishhook spine showed up pretty well. Can't really see one in good definition, but they're still, again, I like photos like this that really come out, but you have to take a whole bunch of them before you get one. Really like this color pattern here with the pink center and the creamy whitish, almost maybe an ivory color on the outside. It's just really pretty. Here we have a fruit that's formed. So we now have completed the cycle. We've got unopened buds. We've got an open flower. We've got an old fruit here that's kind of shriveled, and a full fruit here. So we know a lot about what the plant looks like. And then there's this one massive cactus that's on that trail that goes over Tortugas. This is on the east facing side of the trail, and it's got 3 fruits on it. And guess who's feeding on it, getting some nectar out of it? That good old honeybee. And these are some of the best spines I've seen on my photos. That hook curling up in and under. So I like that one a lot, other than I wish I had the bee's eyes instead of his butt. But what do you do? And then here's a digger bee getting his fill of nectar and pollen. And I really like this side view, and with the shading, here's an ant. That just with the stigma up against the petal, just really attractive. And then we have other Phacelias. Back down along the river. These are late flowering ones. And our honeybee. Now we have the New Mexico state plant and state flower, Yucca elata, the soap tree yucca. This one's just starting to form a flowering spike over on the lower part of Tortugas. And these happen in June. Here's one fully in flower. Again, the further you get away, the worse the pictures become in terms of detail. This is out on the Jornada looking towards the San Andres Mountains, a nice blue, cloudy sky. Sometimes you just have to shoot one part of the plant, and it's always the flowers for me. Sometimes they're so heavy, they lay over at a horizontal. That's kind of a fun shot to get a horizontal against the sky. This is that arroyo below Tortugas Mountain over on the southeast side. And there are a lot of soap tree yuccas down there. And this one is growing out of a hill slope, so it's got a really big angle on it. And then at White Sands too, it's really cool to see these plants and these flowers against those white sand dunes. For that, and that's how much better can you get for a state flower to have it growing out at White Sands as a backdrop. The fruits, follow it through, catch a few fruits, a beetle eating on one. Fruits, and you can tell again we're at White Sands. And this is what happens. You really have to beware when you allow your small soap tree yucca to ride ponies when they're young. The little sand dunes that are just below Tortugas support this composite called paper flower. And it's kind of unique because it's only got 3 petals, 3 ray flowers that show up in a small group of disc flowers. They're real pretty, and they often are real dense, and usually at the same level, so you can get them all in focus. So I have fun with paper flowers whenever I find them. I've also seen them out at White Sands. Here's some little guy, looks like maybe a beetle or a bug getting ready to feed on something. And these are some photos from White Sands, the same plant. A little darker, different time, but the 3 petals. This is a really common plant that you'll see almost anywhere you go in middle elevations, and this is the rough Menodora. It's actually in the olive family, and it has only 2 anthers along with the stigma. But because of the way it grows and the color of the petals and everything, it is tough to get a focus, really good focus picture on more than 1 or 2 flowers, or maybe a flower and a bud. So this is another one I'm working on to try to get better at. But it's so common that it's really easy to find. Sometimes you can spread your photo out and catch some buds that haven't flowered versus some that have flowered. That it's kind of a different look too. But no matter how much you play with them, it's really tough to bring the whole flower cluster into focus. But it's still a cool plant. Here we have somebody feeding in there. I'm not sure, maybe beetles. Two stamens. And smorgasbord, here we have 2 black and orange spotted beetles. It looks like they're blister beetles because the elytra don't cover the tail. And then we have 2 flies that are also feeding. They look like the same species. So here we have 3 flowers and we got 4 insect feeders there. So they are valuable to some insects for sure as a food source. This is a common weedy species, but it's too pretty to pass up. This is the wallpaper image of silverleaf nightshade, or what I learned as horse nettle. And it's even though it's a Eurasian weed that has been introduced, it grows everywhere around. You'll find it up on almost any mountain and any slope, or down in the river valley. And it's just too weird of configurations and too striking of a flower to pass up in the field. And so and it's also a great place to find big bees like carpenter bees and Sonoran bumblebees and Protoxia bees. And then here's an ant. But so I have more pictures than I should of this particular plant because it is weedy, but I still like it. And there's a white flowered form that occurs along the river, along the Rio Grande Trail, down by La Llorona Park. And it's always interesting for me to see color variants among the petal colors on these plants. I guess I'm just I don't know why I'm so interested in that kind of stuff, but I just like to see it. Red ant. Has really good texture if you can catch it. I think this one had a little bit of shading on it, so there wasn't so much sun glare. So you can see the texture in that petal as well. Looks like a beetle. Always closer. Very spiny stem. You do not want to grab it by the stem. Here we have a red ant crawling around on the back of the flower, and we have a female carpenter bee honing right in on it. Well, I'm going to land and get some pollen, some nectar, and come away happy on this one. Here's another female carpenter bee. You can see how much pollen that she has attached to her, the hairs on the back of her legs. And then following the fruits, this is right at the mouth of Soledad Canyon where these fruits had formed. And here's another great purple hair streak using it as a perch. Sometimes you get really lucky and you find old fruits and old stems and leaves growing along the Rio Grande. And there happens to be a 12-spotted skimmer hunting from them, using them as a perch to hunt from. And you come away with a really nice photo. And if you're even luckier, you can actually get some of the nightshade blue flowers in the background against the against the shining wings of this 12-spotted skimmer. Very large dragonfly. Asters. I saw somebody's image pop up earlier who had asters in the background, so you may like this one. Asters start flowering very early. You'll start seeing some in April, these purple asters, and they're going to flower, different species are going to flower all the way through about October. So I put all the asters together in a little series here, just to show a little bit of the diversity and also their attractiveness to insects, especially late in the summer. And this would, aster is one of the plants you can actually take a distance photo of and make it look kind of good. And just an individual flower with some opening buds around it makes for a great image. This is a later flowering one. And we have a Lourdes shoulder, it's called a shoulder fly, genus Lourdes on this one. And this is it in profile. And just the sweeping nature of the aster petals with a nice fuzzy fly on it just makes for, again, a nice composition. I wish it was just a little more in focus, but it's not bad. This butterfly is called a common buckeye. Again, late in the season, all of the milkweeds have closed up and are done flowering. So they're attracted to these late flowering asters along the river, along the Rio Grande Trail. The monarchs that migrate through late, the ones that migrate in late September, October, feed extensively on the late season asters along the Rio Grande Trail. Then here's another weed from Eurasia, the biennial white sweet clover. And we have two different species of blue butterflies feeding on it. This one is called Rheakurtz blue, named after a person's name. And this is called the marine blue. So it's two for one in the photo. And here's that Rheakurtz blue, just a little bit closer up, still foraging on white sweet clover. And here's an unusual one, the only one I've ever seen, the only good picture I've ever got. It's called an American snout. And it does indeed have a snout and nice clear eye, nice clear antenna. So I'm really pleased with that shot. But it is feeding on a weedy species of, the white sweet clover. Right along the river's edge, here's a little series of plants, the water speedwell or veronica, water smartweed. Here's a eastern amberwing dragonfly, a female, perched on top of a water smartweed along the edge of the river. Here we have the water smartweed, the very last flower vestiges on a whorled milkweed, and a pair of orange sulfur butterflies. Really rare to be able to get a dorsal wing photo. So this one was flying away. The camera happened to pick it up, and then a ventral wing feeding. Here we have a plant called spiny chloracantha. It starts flowering real early in the season in April. And then it flowers all the way through October, sometimes November. This little butterfly is a painted crescent. We'll get better photos. But later in the season, it's real attractive to these anthracene bee flies, very large bee flies. Very, very showy, I think they're real pretty in their makeup. And if you can get a good flower and a good bee fly, you've got a really nice photo, especially with some other flowers as background. But this is the kind of stuff that I really enjoy doing. It's a challenge to be able to get the flower and the insect all in the right place. Try to get most of it in focus. And a photo like this is really good for me. I really like this kind of photo, this kind of detail. And this is probably my favorite photo of all from last summer. Shooting images over these spiny chloracantha with this big anthracene bee fly. You can see the venation really well, and all the little wrinkles in the wing and all the hairs. Just this color right here around the back of its head and its eyes is so intense, it's amazing. Same plant, spiny chloracantha with painted crescent. This is the most common small butterfly along the river. Here's one with a few fruits formed, just about ready to blow away. This is called yellow nutsedge, grows right at the water's edge. This is the flowers of Johnson grass. Johnson grass is another introduced pasture grass that is escaped along the river and doing quite well. And it has a very broad leaf, which these two mating Sonoran bumblebees used as a windbreak. This nice wide, it was kind of a cold morning. The wind was coming from the north, and they were right behind that leaf like a windbreak and hanging onto the panicle of the Johnson grass to go ahead and mate. Everybody likes rabbit's foot scratch. It's so soft, just like a rabbit's foot. And it's more humane to clip one of those onto your keychain than the actual real thing. Barnyard grass, another introduced one, but this blue dasher dragonfly really enjoys perching on it to hunt. So it's useful in and of its own self because of that. Tall shrub along the river, it's called mule's fat or baccharis. And when it's in flower, queen butterflies love to feed on it. And this is a female queen. So that part of the female part of the migration is moving through. These are also females. These are a little older, a little tatter wing. So they've been through some rough times, maybe a storm or something. Right along one of the drainage ditches is one of the sunflowers, the Texas blueweed. It's a helianthus that you don't always see all the time, but there's some nice ones along the drain coming into the river. And at first I thought, gee, it's really odd to see a moth out feeding during the day because I usually feed at night. And then when I process the image, say, whoa, look at this green crab spider making a meal out of what probably is a corn earworm moth right here on a Texas blueweed. So that's a lot of color right there. You got a blue weed, a green spider, and a white moth. Back to the butterweeds. Here, there are some late season butterweeds, and I have a little series of shots. These are mostly from Soledad Canyon. And here's a pygmy blue butterfly, also a pair of breeding beetles feeding on the flower. This is you see the yellow hairs on the belly of this one. I think this is a leaf cutter bee. Again, feeding on Senecio butterweeds. You can tell them real easily because these filaries are one row and they're really long all the way around the flowers. So that's a pretty easy way to tell the Senecios. And there's a little bit of a blow up of that leaf cutter bee. And we have the obligate white butterfly, probably a checkered white. And again, pretty good focus. You can see the eye really well, the eye detail. And this one got a little bit of a different angle, so you can really see the venation in the wing really well as the antenna and the eyes. So, and here it has its little proboscis down getting nectar. So it is actually nectaring on the butterweed or Senecio. Another weed, salt cedar or tamarisk, that grows along the Rio Grande. Typically, you like to eliminate this stuff, but because of the system there and the function that it performs, sometimes I think it's good to leave them because they're widely fed on by white butterflies, and I'm pretty sure this is a checkered white. Black swallowtail foraging on those tamarisk flowers. The dorsal view of the black swallowtail may be the same one. Queen butterfly foraging on those flowers. But the one who uses the most is the desert viceroy. Here's the dorsal view of a desert viceroy. And they really prefer these tamarisk flowers over everything else. They won't even feed on milkweeds, which is kind of strange to me. Here's the ventral wing of that desert viceroy again. And here's a pair that were going through their courtship dance or flights and stopping to feed every once in a while in a tamarisk. Everybody knows Jimson weed or datura or thornapple or whatever you call it. It has so many common names. And there is a ton of it flowering along the river. And also, almost every lower wash that you find. So it's hard not to take photos of them because you're so attracted to the huge flower and the even when it's curled up in bud, it's a cool photo. And later in the season, as you get deeper and deeper into the fall, late summer and fall, when the evening temperatures cool, this color around the edge gets more violet. And when it's the coldest temperatures that this flower can survive, it's almost all purple. And it's really fun to watch that color change happen over the season too. This is a favorite flower of the really big bumblebees, as well as honeybees, of course. And I was able to get 3 of them vertical without too much blurring. So I'm always pleased when a photo comes out like that. It's an interesting little plant. There's only one patch of it that I've seen along the river. It's called fog fruit. And it's the genus species Phylocuniifolia. And it must produce a really prodigious amount of nectar because butterflies just love it. Here's a variegated fritillary coming into nectar and completely covering the little flower. And then it brings a buddy, so you got a variegated fritillary and a common buckeye, both feeding on the same little patch of fog fruit. And I always like it when I find a little something like this, it's different. This is a plant called a roving sailor. It vines up over all the stuff down by the river. And it has kind of a pale, grayish blue flower. And a very distinct triangular, sharp-pointed leaf. And a really angled fruit. It's It's always fun trying to put all that stuff together and get something that turns out. Okay, now I call this pencil cholla. Most people call it Christmas cactus or Christmas cholla. It's a real skinny, real spindly one. And it's got really, really long thorns. But the flowers are interesting to me because they're this light, limey green, yellowish green color. And they're real easy to bring into focus. So I like it because almost every photo is a good one. You don't really have to throw any away. One of the things I've learned with this one is if you can take some images near sundown, when there's just a little bit of really low quality light, they tend to have a real nice kind of a glow to them. And it's always good when you can get a pair with all of the parts in good focus and some spines as well. Got to have the fruits, and this is probably why they call it a Christmas cactus, because of the red fruits. This is one of those glowing kind of shots at dusk when I was out taking moon shots, and just before dark or just before the sunset, you're able to get this quality of light and the effect it has. And either this is a really, really small flower or that is a really, really big bee. I haven't quite figured that out yet, but I think it's a very large digger bee going for pollen and nectar in that flower. And then here is a really huge robber fly, which is a top order predator in the insect world, hiding against a pencil cholla stem during the day. And here it is on a dead pencil cholla stem, perched for action, ready to grab onto whatever he can find out there. And they can take some pretty big insects when it's one this size. And they're very, very effective predators. Robber fly. Down along the river, there's the 4 o'clock, the large one that pops up around, right around the end of June, middle to end of June. And it's really interesting to try to take photos of because the first flowers kind of lay out one direction and the buds are another direction in the umbel. So it's a little bit different to try to take flowers of it. They're pretty. But the most fun I have actually, and what I think is the prettiest about these flowers are the fruit bracts. These three huge bracts with all this venation. And when they're young, they're kind of a pink color. Still some flowers open. As they get just a tiny bit older, they start getting a little more white in them. And then when they're old, they reflect the sun so well. And also in the shade, the venation stands out so well that this is probably one of my favorite shots right here from last year, is this 4 o'clock with just the fruits in fairly bright sun. Okay, let's do some cob beehive cactus. Now we're rolling down the back stretch for anybody who fell asleep, sort of. Tortugas Peak and Bishop's Cap and also Picacho Mountain all have really good populations of this cob beehive cactus, and they're indescribably pretty and delicate looking. And they have this really bright white stigma. And they put out, some of the individual plants just put out tons of flowers. Right sun, they kind of shine in the sunlight. They glow down in the base. How's that for contrast? Fairly shadowed flowers, little bit of light out here, and this is big, bright stigma. These will pop out in June and into July. And I think they have a tendency to be a little more aware of rainstorms if you have a rainstorm. This one is just amazing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 full open flowers with one in the sun enough that the base just glows. One with the stamens all twisted around. It's just amazing once you start looking at pictures really closely, what you find. But the west-facing slope of Tortugas Peak has a really good population of these. There's a digger bee getting some food. Another one. And this is the biggest crab spider I have ever seen. I think they could use, if they caught one of those on Deadliest Catch, it would be big enough to haul into the cannery. Then we have the Doniana beehive cactus. And most of these images are from Picacho Mountain a little later in the season, but it also flowers in good numbers on the lower apron of Tortugas Mountain down in the creosote bush. So the Doniana beehive cactus. And again, it's just one of those plants that is kind of indescribably pretty. The flowers range from this sort of whitish pink to really deep pink, and another one with a white stigma. And it's one of the few that a whole cluster of flowers can be brought into focus with no problem. This is getting towards the brighter end of the pink. Get a little bit of shade on them. They even look a little darker. Excuse me. Digger bee. Here's a couple of beetles and a very large fly. And here's another white crab spider, finding him a nice hunting, or her a nice hunting spot, just waiting for the critters to roll in. And here's my all-time favorite cactus flower. That's Turk's Cap. This one is hiding a little bit under an ocotillo that's all leafed out. This is last year's. And when I say that you take a photo and the next cactus you go to has even a prettier flower presentation, I mean it with these guys. They also call these eagle's claws, the way the stout spines come out of these cactus, but Turk's Cap seems to be one of the most accepted names. But the intensity of the color of the flowers and the ability to bring it in focus, and then all of the shiny surfaces when you're in bright sunshine is just amazing to see. Typically, you have 1 to 3 flowers on them, but here's one with 6. It's one of those overachievers, I guess. It'll get more than a participation trophy, that's for sure. They have kind of a light reddish stigma up to a deep red. And here's a color variant that's a whitish pink with this really dark burgundy center. And you see a few of those each time you go out, and I really like that color. And sometimes they look really frilly when the sun's shining right on them. The base just glows around the stamens. And I think this is why I just, you can't describe this flower to anyone and have them believe it or even imagine it. And I think that's why I like this one the best of all of the flowers. This is probably the best photo I took last year. It's actually 2 cacti, one big one with 4 flowers and one smaller one behind it with 1 flower. But this sort of a wrinkly surface that just has all these facets that glow in the sun. A single large individual flower. It's real common to see double flowers on these cacti. Digger bee, enjoying the view and enjoying the food. That big fly again, I don't know what species it is. have to get a really good photo sometime and try it out. And here's, again, is this grazing that happens occasionally, but this time it's 5 full flowers that were grazed down. And I'm thinking small mammals, or maybe even something as large as a cottontail or even a jackrabbit. But I may be wrong. Okay, white sands, right at the end of spring, just starting summer. We have this prairie catchfly gentian. And this flower is so subtle, but so beautiful. It's just hard to describe. And it's got that sort of same pattern that you see in vernal flax, where you've got a solid kind of bluish color here, then a white, then a darker bluish color. And so I really, really enjoyed taking this series of photos, and have to get back out there again. I think if you go out around the 1st of July, last few days of June might be the best time. And again, it's right on the entry road to where the very first pullout is, on the west side to go walk in the dunes. And these are in the low swale, moist swale down below the dune face. But another one of those flowers that if you tried to describe it to someone, you really couldn't do it justice. And if you get just a little bit of shadowing like this one has, it just has such a mellow color. This is my favorite because I get 3 buds that are about equidistant, as well as a nice open flower, vertical shot. Interesting to see this little rim right up here too. So the prairie catchfly gentian. Here we have desert sunflower. Again, these are out at White Sands, so they show up nice and bright. Got some late evening sun that they're catching, so they a little more gold, a little bit more shadowing on them. This is our annual sunflower, sort of the common one that we see around here and elsewhere. Very big, broad leaves grow along the river. And again, this is one of those situations where you got a very big bee that's claimed the whole center of that sunflower to said, it's mine and I'm going to have a meal. And it's real interesting to see an annual sunflower native in with a field of horticultural sunflowers grown for seed. As I often drive Calle del Norte down to the river to take my bike down and take bike rides down there. And one farmer along Calle del Norte had put in a small field of sunflowers. And once they got to this level of flowering, every day I would see 3 or 4 or 5 cars parked on both sides of the road. And, because it's rural, nobody was wearing a mask. I never, ever saw one person that was taking pictures and looking at this field that didn't have a big smile on their face. So I say kudos to the farmer who planted this field. And I sure had a good time taking a few photos as well. Just love the pattern on the inside of the sunflower with the seed formation versus the open flowers. And then here's a honeybee that's found Nevada, I think. But he planted them under some smaller pecan trees. And it almost reminds me perhaps of something that might be Italian, when you look at an image like that. But everybody who saw that sure was happy. Where I used the Rio Grande Trail, here's a stand of whorled milkweed. And these things attract more insects and everything than you can imagine. Right next to where the river flows, right in front of some 3 square bulrush plants. They help break the wind, which makes it easier for the insects to forage when it gets real windy. Whorled milkweed are kind of have this pretty creamy white flower, and very nectarine. Here's a group of migrating queen butterflies. I think we got 5 of them, and then 1 tarantula hawk These tarantula hawks are no joke either. They get up to about 1.75 inches. And if I remember correctly, one of the species of tarantula hawks is a state insect, but I don't know which one. This is a bee called the glorious protoxia bee. Very beautiful, very hairy brown bee with a nice gray eye, and you occasionally see them feeding on world milkweed. Here's our tarantula hawk wasp. They say if you get stung by a tarantula hawk wasp, to just lay down on the ground for about 20 minutes and wish you were dead, because the sting is so powerful and it's so painful. And they use it to stun spiders the size of tarantulas and drag them down their burrow for the young. You can tell they're good pollinators of milkweed. You see all of the sacs here of pollen. They're attached to its feet. And as it moves around on other flowers, it reinserts those into other flowers to cross-pollinate. So it's an extremely good pollinator of milkweed flowers. What's really fun is to watch them when they get really deep into a flower. They'll actually curl their antennas away, so they kind of like Snidely whiplash there and feeding in a flower. Another extremely good pollinator are these flower wasps. This is called the hairy-footed flower wasp. This is a small painted crescent butterfly. A really striking wasp that uses and feeds on these flowers. Another good pollinator is Ashmead's digger wasp. This really bright orange abdomen, very shiny eyes and orange wings. And then this is part of a weevil wasp, a real skinny wasp that feeds out on the milkweed flowers. But I really, really like trying to get good pictures of this Ashmead's digger wasp. I think they're just as pretty as can be, especially if you can get most of the body parts in focus. This is the weevil wasp, a very, very long wasp. And fortunate to get that one totally in focus on it, along with a couple of milkweed flowers. I like this one because it just kind of looks like it's fading into the fog or something of the flower. And then there's a red end up here. And on one day, I was out along a stand up by La Llorona Park, and there was one pair of these weevil wasps that were breeding or mating, and all these other weevil wasps showed up to that same flower head. So I got one picture with a whole bunch of weevil wasps. And it's the first time I've ever seen anything like that. Usually they're pretty solitary feeders. This is called a golden paper wasp, and it has a lot of striking colors, but those are the kind that do the nests around trees and in your house and all that kind of stuff that you have to be careful of. And then this is a blue butterfly. I don't know which species feeding on the milkweed. It might be the Rheakurtz blue with this color pattern back here, but they're very attractive little butterflies. They're tiny. This is a common sulfur, a female. See the proboscis loop up here, taking nectar out of the flower. This is a gray hair streak. Oh, you can always tell hair streaks. They have these little tails that flip out the back. Another gray hair streak and a couple of, these are leafcutter bees that are coming in to feed. This is a dusky wing butterfly along with a leafcutter bee feeding together, nectaring on this, in the case of the dusky wing. And then this is the most common small butterfly, as I said before, the painted crescent, and they just love hanging out on the world milkweed. Here's a pair of them with weevil wasp. Here's a large Mexican scoliid, but you can't see them very well behind painted crescents. And sometimes you get a whole bunch of them together that are trying to select partners, or they're having some kind of mating thing going on. It's really interesting to try to get as much of that in focus as you can. Here we have painted crescents with a common buckeye, all foraging on or nectaring on milkweed flowers. Common buckeye with a dark colored wasp, probably a Mexican scoliid. Variegated fritillary. And a whole passel of queens again. Again, these are all females right here. This is the male with the dark glandular spot here. 3 queens feeding on, and 2 in this one feeding on whorled milkweed. When they're pretty fresh coming into the migration, they're really gorgeous against the white flower and then with the sun shining on them. This is a male. You can see the glands back here on the lower part of the wing. And you have survived my show of flowering plants for the spring from February to June and just a tad beyond. So I really appreciate it. Anybody who's still out there, I appreciate your patience. And at this point, have a good night. And I hope that when you close your eyes tonight, you just see this whole kaleidoscope of flower colors and bugs and different angles of flowers and all that sort of thing. I hope it all mushes together in a kaleidoscope for you.